Okay, sweet. The mics work this time. Everything's all good. How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? This is Turn Down for Walt and my co-host RadarSSBM here, coming at you guys with another installment of the Mix-Up on this lovely May 12th evening here. And we have a really cool guest and actually a very cool concept that was devised by Mr. Co-host Radar here, talking about the state of Melee in 2021. We're going to be filling out kind of like a report card of sorts, and what better guests that we could have had for this kind of topic to really talk about the state of Melee than none other than Aiden Calvin. So how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Yeah, things have been going well off the, just wrapped up SCL, which is kind of nice. It's like all done. Really happy with the final product. Yeah, are you guys having a good day? I really thanks a lot for having me on this.
Yes. Real quick before we really get into kind of the meat of everything, I fucked up and I didn't test my audio before we went live. So if someone in chat can tell us if my audio levels, Radar Aiden's audio levels are all good, that would be lovely. They seem to be okay.
Yeah, if everyone can kind of get a good idea of no one's too loud, we all sound fine. That's just good to know in advance. But yeah, no, I think Aiden is on paper, if we were to try and imagine a guest that would fit the how do we evaluate the state of the game on a esports level, on a player level, on a community level, it is actually very difficult to find a more qualified guest. So it lines up quite nicely, and I'm definitely excited for this episode.
I appreciate the sentiment very much. It's weird to hear myself evaluated that way, because it wasn't that way for so long. So it's very, very funny. I don't know. Thank you very much. But I'm really excited to go through this. I think the example, what you modeled the concept off of that you showed me, somebody did something similar for the Overwatch scene. Yep. I think that example looks really, really cool. So I'm excited for this. I think it's a very unique way to approach the conversation about the game.
Full credit to if anyone follows Overwatch, SVB is a content creator, and he was the one who kind of gave me this idea. Not personally handed it to me or anything, but I watched his content. And yeah, he basically just kind of broke down the game, and I was like, we definitely need to do this for Melee. I haven't seen someone do it in that kind of way. So I came up with sort of some of the same categories, some different categories, but I think especially where Melee is right now, where it's we're so, the Slippy era, we're so far into the kind of game's development and sort of evolution that there's a lot to talk about and a lot of stuff that kind of can go forward. So yeah, it's exciting for sure.
I think it's going to be a really fun episode, and just a couple kind of housekeeping things for you guys who are filtering in the chat right now. If anyone wants to type in !report card, you guys can actually write in along with us. It's going to link you to a Google form where you can kind of fill out your rankings of where you kind of think the state of Melee is in your own opinion. Radar and myself will kind of collect all the answers at the end, and we'll make a little, graphic to see where the general populace lies. And then I know Radar had kind of the three of us in mind for kind of putting our own rankings down and making discussion kind of pieces about where we stand on why we rank certain things in certain ways. In terms of other announcements for you guys, I do want to have a quick SCL recap, especially when we have one of the masterminds behind the team at BTS here, kind of get a better idea of what goes into an event like that. And I think it does lead in very well to kind of some of the topics that we'll be talking about for this report card. One more thing that I wanted to personally include, I actually did see Know the Status Quo in chat, and I just wanted to give him a personal shout out. I've been mentioning some of his stuff on my previous streams in the past few weeks, but Shane is organizing a fundraising event for AAPI COVID relief. It's actually a merch store where you can buy Melee themed merch. I'm actually wearing some right now. It's pretty dope. And all the proceeds are going to AAPI COVID relief. He actually raised over $4,000 the first month of the store being open, and I think he's keeping it open for the rest of this month. His store is, I believe, knowthestatusquo.com or just statusquo.com. I see him typing in chat, so you're more than welcome to link it there. But just wanted to kind of point that out to you guys if you guys are interested in getting some sweet Melee theme merch and also supporting a good cause. Please consider it. So, yeah. But that being said, let's talk about SCL as a whole, week by week, however you guys want to do it. I personally want to hear, what goes into the production and like the background of it from you, Aiden, and then kind of your thoughts on the event as a whole. Because I know you did tweet recently about like you're already tweeting about improvements that you can make for the next time you guys do it, which is awesome to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. That's just the way I think I've approached events for a long time. Is like it's usually heavily based on like iterating on like whatever I did before and then trying to improve that concept going forward. I think that's more perhaps better expressed through the series of tournaments I've done in the past, where I think pretty much everything I think I've done is like, oh shit, how can I make this better? Because like there's always this idea of like chasing perfection within the game, but as a TO, I feel like there's always something you could do to like improve the experience of like the viewer or the attendee. And yeah, it was like hard as we like went through that last week. It was really hard not to think about like, fuck, this isn't like shit. We gotta fix this. I don't like the way this works. And it sort of the problem of like not having all the weeks like count with equal value was something I was kind of thinking about at the beginning, but thought that the playoffs might help balance out a bit. But I think ultimately something needs to be adjusted where like week 1 and week 2 have some sort of weight in the playoff bracket at the end of the season, because I felt like week 3 week 3 results like heavily affected everything, and like week 1 and 2 were more like these stasis weeks where you were just trying to like keep your place in your position or like basically put yourself in as good of a position for week 3 as possible, which is not necessarily a good format, I think. So that would definitely be the big improvement. As far as like what goes into it, I think the process like probably is like not as complex or as like difficult as people expect, especially for this second season. The nice thing about the first season, or like the nice thing about having the first season already done, is that a lot of the groundwork of like what made this challenging was already out of the way. And It was a big part of like what made this event viable was like the production package really just needed to be like recolored and like adjusted a little bit for like the new like logo and the new color scheme. And then the like format is already made. The schedule is basically already made. We don't have to walk players through what it's like to set up like these player cams and this Slippy replay system that were all like new things to online players when we did this the first time around. And that takes a lot of like the difficulty out of the project, because like players know what to expect. Very little is changing between this season and the last one, other than this like format change between the last weeks. And then better yet, the viewers like have something to be excited for and expect something out of the gate instead of this brand new product that's sort of like testing the waters. So putting season 2 together, like when all is said and done, was probably many fewer hours than anybody would expect. Season 1 was much more difficult to put together. And I'm really happy that like the work that we put in for season 1 got to pan out into this product, because like I think season 2 was better in so many ways. Sure. And I think you can tell by the like public reception of it too. Like people just enjoyed it more. So that's kind of what goes into it. It's just like, scheduling, planning, contacting players. It's not as heavy duty when you have most of the work like done from a previous season.
Sure. Just curious, actually, how do you feel about I know you kind of briefly touched on the way the format worked, where it's kind of like you work for week 3 the way it was in season 2. How do you feel about just like having a 4-week season in general? Because I know like some people were saying the way the format works right now, kind of 4 weeks feels okay because it doesn't get too repetitive, like with kind of just having similar matches over and over again. Like, would you consider extending that to like a longer like season? For instance, I know like LCS does like 10-week seasons or something absurd. Like they do much longer runs for certain events and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reason that we keep it down to 4 weeks is sort of just like the nature of the game. Like when I think about expanding the season, it's very difficult to like expand the scope of something like this because of like just how short games of Melee are. So even when you go to best of 5, like, and we've never really taken the idea of like best of 7 or higher seriously, and which would arguably be unnecessarily dragging things out. I don't know how well received anything beyond best of 7 would be in the first place. But removing that from the picture, like Melee sets in their current state are like relatively short. And to expand something like this, you would need to add new players or maybe change the format of some kind. But the problem right now is like if you did expand this, like there would be so many repeat matchups, and I think people would get pretty bored of like seeing the same things over and over again. And like the more matches you have like that in some sort of like group stage or like season equivalent, I think people realize that like each game doesn't have as high of stakes either, so it's like not as engaging in that sense. The nice thing about this is that with the like how few matchups there are and how high stakes every match is, I think like every set of SCL has a lot of value, even for the people who are like a little lesser known. Like you can watch a set that's not Zane versus Mango and still care a lot because it has this like resounding effect on the rest of the season, whether that person like wins or loses. Whereas like with League, and it's funny because like right now I'm currently really busy with a Counter-Strike Summit. And the way Counter-Strike Summit is scheduled is it's 15 days long, and we have 2 best of 3s each day, and every match is streamed. And and there's almost no repeat matchups. Like there's no scheduled repeat matchups, right? And that's because like every Counter-Strike best of 3 is about 3 hours long. And it's just, and think about how many sets we fit into 3 hours. Like it's just I think it's just the reality of like Melee. It's like that sort of extended format just does not really work as well. And I think stretching it out beyond 4 weeks is one, it's unreasonable for our internal schedule. We have a bunch of other stuff that goes on in our studio that we need that space for. And then 2, I don't think Melee spectators really want to see something longer than that anyway. I think the 4-week format or maybe a 5-week format is kind of the most that you would want.
One thing I've always been kind of curious about is there ever a discussion behind the scenes, especially now that online kind of offers different ways to kind of present Melee content? Is there ever any like shorter term, like smaller highlight style kind of show matches maybe because that you guys would ever think of doing? Because the one downside for me that I felt about pretty much every Smash tournament as like obviously a big fan of Smash is that if I'm not at the event, and even if you are at the event, it's like your whole weekend is just watching Melee, and it's good, but eventually you're like, oh my god, like I'm just sitting here on the couch, like I'm just sitting here live tweeting or whatever. And sometimes I think to myself, like, I'd love if this was like broken up a little bit, if I could just like turn on 2 hours of Melee and have that. But maybe for all the structural reasons I can already think of, that just would never work. But I'm curious what someone who actually does that kind of thing would say on that issue.
I think it has a lot to do with like costs, and pretty much every problem in Melee is boiled down to like how do you pay for this, and that has a lot to do with like why the problem exists that you're describing. Like sure, we could go this like scheduled show match route and like build up to these specific matchups every week, which is almost kind of like what SCL is, or like what other tournaments have tried. Like when we did the first Saving Mr. Lombardi, we had like a card of like exhibition matches that happened after the tournament was over. And those were the main things that we advertised in the lead up to that event. Like the bracket was there, but the main show at that event was the best of 7 or the best of 9 between Ginger and Fiction at the end.
It's like
and that was the idea. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then Octagon did that later on, right? And then and I think those are good examples, but like the reality is, I bet if you look at that Octagon budget, I mean on paper that loses money every time. And the only reason Saving Mr. Lombardi got money is because it was an in-person tournament at a cheap as fuck college venue that we could pay for with venue fees, and then we happened to throw exhibition matches on it at the end. And kind of it's like you need enough money to like be able to support a short enough production where you can focus on only those matches. But because of the format of open tournaments where like ticket sales are the primary source of revenue for most of these events, not sponsors, historically, then you really have to like accept that you need to have these open tournaments to make your events financially viable. Unless for some reason like we all of a sudden got to an era where people are willing to show up only as spectators as the primary source of ticket revenue. But most people who are going to tournaments are going as competitors to some degree, right? They're not going only to spectate for the weekend. So I think that's probably the main issue. And I mean, I think I'm in a similar camp to you, Radar. Like confession, I'm kind of a fake fan in that regard where like I barely watch Melee tournaments anymore. Like when big tournaments come on, like the only reason I watch the ones that have happened this year, like almost all the way through, is because I ran them.
You work them.
And I was in the production room. But if I'm not working the tournament, like when Four Loko happened, that was like a great tournament that had a lot of people in it, but I probably watched 3 sets like that whole weekend. And I'm not really interested in sitting like on my computer to watch a full tournament anymore. And like I love doing that at the venue physically in person, like watching Top 64 and running around for an entire afternoon to watch all those sets. Love that. My favorite part of every Melee major. But I think like the viewership experience, especially for anybody who is like kind of seen hardened and has seen a bunch of tournaments unfold before, it's like you can't spend every weekend watching every big tournament, right? It's just not possible.
Glasses.
Yeah.
Like,
especially when
enough.
If you compare it to like other esports, which obviously you're talking about kind of the Counter-Strike stuff, like I'll watch like a StarCraft event or something, and there's obviously the big weekend long tournaments, but there's also just like here's like a 3-hour broadcast, and I'll think like, oh, maybe I'll watch that tonight. It's like a really long movie or something. Not like, oh man, I actually kind of want to watch the Division 2 stuff, but then if I don't watch the Division 1 stuff, that's kind of weird too. So I guess I should watch some of this. And like, for someone like Walt who's making the recap things, he has to. It must be a lot of time, or it is a lot of time. I don't even know.
It's so annoying, dude. Like, because I miss a lot of it too, because just doing things on the weekend, and then I'm like, to do those videos as like a total side note, I was just like, oh my fucking god! Like, I have to look through every single set, and there's so many. It's like there's less than there would be in a traditional bracket, at least for the first 3 weeks. But not by much, funny. So it's still like a lot to look through.
I like those videos a lot, actually. Like I've watched them. I think they do a good job. Even having watched the tournaments, I know they aren't doing as well as like some of your biggest videos. I think that content is valuable, like a recap thing.
I joked about this with my with one of my friends who like does YouTube marketing as like a side gig, and I was just like, it's so funny because the response to it was like, oh, like this is what the community needs, bro. Like this is the content we fucking need. And I was like, dude, if it's the content that we needed, then give it more views. Like, why does it only have 5,000 views? Like,
you know what this is? It's the doubles of YouTube content, dude.
Yeah.
Oh, you love doubles? Everybody we cut doubles?
Exactly.
And you're upset? Oh, how come none of you fucking watched, dude?
Aiden,
how come?
Oh, we are same page, man. Hell yeah.
It's facts right now.
My god. Yeah, it makes me so
discouraged. You really don't love doubles. You love doubles enough to watch the whole time? I didn't think so. And that's exactly what it is. With every piece of like, oh god, it's such a pet peeve. Slime was actually talking about this. I won't toss him under the bus, but he was talking about someone else who was like talking about how like, oh, this would be so sick for like commentators and so sick for the scene. And it was like, one, who do you think is gonna fucking make that? Who do you think is gonna pay for it? And also, if this got made, like, not that many people are gonna use it. That's the reality. There's so many ideas that are like cool on paper, but are not actually like functionally that useful to people. It's the same thing as like, I don't know. That's the same thing with, I don't know, startup companies. Like, oh, that idea sounds like really cool, but it's a way different conversation to get people to actually use that thing. So I think I feel your pain in that regard. I'm sure it hurts more when you're dumping all this time into like a video product and those things are like monetized.
I mean,
but I understand like what you're saying.
It's definitely rough. Like they don't take like a stupid long time, but at the same time they still take time that has to be invested. So it's kind of like I could have been spending this time working on a much larger project that, has like longevity beyond. That's the other problem too with doing like recapping an event is like it really just loses its luster after a week.
There's no reason to go back to it later. Yeah. Unlike long form sort of documentary content where I think YouTube's like been pretty good I'll just get dished a documentary that's like a year plus old.
Yeah, and
like
you can
it's
watch
still
it at any
relevant,
point.
right?
It doesn't matter. Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
That's the part that's tough, where people were asking me actually on stream, like, "Oh, why do you think they're not working well?" And I was like, "Because a fucking week went by, man. Like, what do you want me to say?" Like, that's
Yeah,
just
nobody cares about SCL week 1 when it's already week 3, right? It's just like it just doesn't matter anymore unless you're like a super fan who wants to parse each match and like each bit of data, which it's just which is not the majority of the crowd, right? And I imagine do you have a full-time job on top of this too, or
yeah,
do you do
I'm an
YouTube
engineer
full-time now?
full-time. So
Yeah, so it's
if
like
I did
it's like
YouTube
fuck
full-time,
all.
I
It's
would
like,
be living on the streets probably, with the way things are going right now. But
YouTube ad revenue.
yeah, you know how that is, man.
Yeah.
Maybe someday.
So I think should we segue into the main event, because I feel like we're touching on little
for
things
sure.
we could actually kind of get to in more depth. But I do want to say that you guys are both super right. I think anyone who's ever been involved in Melee or like esports or just anything is that people come up with ideas or people make statements, including myself, like I'm being hypocritical here, and they'll say like, we need blank. And it's like, okay, but how do we actually do that? What kind of people need to come together? What kind of financial resources need to come together? It's very easy to be like, if we just did this, everything would change. But so often it feels like that's what happens, and it's not so simple at all.
All I do,
passion only
guys.
fuels things for so long. I think that's like the main thing. Is like
Yep.
at the end of the day, you can only ride off passion and drive for something and do it for free for so long. Like this is I think a good example is like a lot of great things come from people just being passionate about something and wanting to dump time into it initially.
Yeah.
Fizzy making rollback, for instance. Amazing gamble. Like he didn't know if it was going to pay off. He didn't know like how it was going to pan out when he started working on that early on. He just had an idea that it was possible. And lucky for him, the community actually has supported him, right? Like his Patreon actually does pretty well. And I think people have like shown their appreciation for him because it's such a massive accomplishment. And ultimately it has paid off, like him approaching that, right? But there are so many other people that approach like much more like small scale projects or things they're like equally passionate about, but they don't like, you can't monetize them in the same way, or they're not as likely to be successful.
Yeah, as a quick response to that, and then I'll change panels to the presentation that Radar put together for this. It's like that's the biggest thing that scares me. Like I've had talks with I think we talked about it with Toph like on the first episode of this show, and I've had conversations with like Gimmer and other larger esports orgs about jumping ship and doing something full time like this, but it scares the shit out of me for that reason, the passion side, because it's like, one does it have legs to be like fully monetizable, like to a similar degree to what my full-time job offers, and two, like how does my passion shift when it actually impacts my paycheck and living? That's the really scary part.
I think that's the big thing for sure.
When there's a lot of stress riding, like it kind of hangs over everything, right? It's like I have to make this successful now, which I think affects your ability to like enjoy the product.
That scares the shit out of me, man. That's the reason I haven't like totally jumped ship on it yet to like try full time, because I'm just like, I really want to keep enjoying this and not just doing it because it's what's making me money. So
well, especially once like, because already, sorry if I'm cutting you off.
No, you're good.
Like when you make a video, you're like, oh man, I really hope this does well. I hope it's worth it. And there's so much of like, oh, should I do this? Or
it's like amplified.
Well? That's the thing. And so if you add in like, oh, I hope I can eat tonight or something into that mix, it's just like, oh man, that's certainly a way to develop a debilitating mental health disorder. So yeah, it's not a great setup for sure. But I don't know. That is the life, I guess, of a content
That's what
creator.
I said to Alston Melee when they were like showing some of my merch. They were like, write us like some quips to put, and I was like, I don't know, tell chat that my dog won't eat dinner if you guys don't buy my merch. And they were like, it might work. It's a bold strategy, but it might work.
Payoff.
But in any case, let's move this over. This should be set up already. Perfect.
Nice. Okay, so if I do this, we can see numbers go on. Or
let me see.
It doesn't look like it's updating, but maybe you just have to like, we'll add in the numbers as we go, and then maybe you have to like, because if I write in like 10 or something, it doesn't say kind of where it's at.
I can close this and then look to see, because it might not be. Oh, it might be because I'm presenting, so I'd have to like open it again, you know?
Okay, well, we can go through. If it doesn't work, ideally, we'll just have to reopen, whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Real quick though, before we get started with that, guys, for everyone who's kind of joining us in chat again, just a reminder: !report card to get access to a Google form. You can fill it out along with us. We'll curate all the responses probably sometime tomorrow, and kind of see where the general populace is at in terms of their rankings for this. But kind of like you can fill it out as we're talking about it, so you can get an idea of what some of these topics mean. And I'd be remiss to say that hashtag Ask the Mixup is still not trending on Twitter, which is absolute horseshit.
we're gonna
So
get there.
eventually we're gonna get there. If you guys have any questions though in the chat, feel free to ask them. For us, for Aiden, we're all ears at the end of the show, as long as we're not going super duper overtime. But yeah, with that we can get started. Radar, if you want to go ahead and kind of explain the thought process behind some of these, and we'll go ahead and start ranking.
Ready. So basically, how we were going to do this is there's going to be 3 categories: gameplay, community, and esports. Within the categories, we're going to be ranking on a 10-point scale. And I'll try to explain when we go through each what the categories are, since they might not be super obvious. So balance refers to kind of the game balance, like how kind of balanced the game feels right now. Is a certain character too oppressive? Is a certain character too weak, etc. Matchmaking is how good the kind of existing matchmaking systems are in the game, which actually I should say as a disclaimer, I do not want this to be an episode where we're just like calling out Fizzy and saying like, hey, this thing isn't good enough. It's more just looking at things as they are and saying, hey, this could be a cool feature. Not so much like nobody at Fizzy after this. Player systems, similar to what I just said, is more like things that exist in game right now that kind of reward you. So a typical esport might have things like achievements, they might have like various ways to show your skill. And I think that kind of there's a lot to say about that, because right now it's an area we're lacking. For some reason it has player systems twice. So I'm not really sure why that's there, but it
You
should
had
say
player experience or character diversity, I think, as the
yeah,
other one.
character diversity. So character diversity, and then you can just update it. I must have made a typo there. So character diversity kind of is tied to balance, but like how good are we on getting a variety of different characters and matchups? And then game content refers to like new content within the game. So stuff like volleyball, stuff like unranked doubles to some degree. What's the other big one? Oh, cosmetics, like kind of Van City Primal stuff, that kind of thing. So,
Shoutouts to him.
but yeah. So I think we should just start with balance. That's probably a good place to start, and kind of discuss where we think the balance is for Melee right now in 2021.
Don't start with me on this one. Aiden, you go. I got a lot to say about this shit, if you saw my Twitter today.
This is a weird question, I think, because I think balance is like this sort of ethereal conversation. It's like how people judge a balance is like very different. I think like the surface level take on balance is probably like what percentage of the roster is like tournament viable, and like does every character have a decent shot against another character, which is clearly not the case, right? Like the reality is if you're like a Bowser player, you probably have no shot. Like it's
Don't
pretty much
say that to me.
0%.
Stop it.
I
don't want to hear this.
But at the same time, we have these people that like really dump time into certain characters that are considered low tier and like elevate them. I think like the nice thing about the game engine is that like ultimately almost any character in the game is like viable to some degree if you put enough work into them. However, like there's this weird thing where like, yeah, the top tiers really do dominate it. Like this subset of like 7 characters are kind of what are considered have a really decent chance of winning a major, with like another subset below those that could do it, but somebody really, really needs to like devote their time. And it's more of a question mark. I think the fact that the game basically has not been patched since it came out, and that there's still this like questionable like exchange of which character is the best, who beats who, what matchups are, like the context of how old the game is and the health of it now and the way people like approach and evaluate matchups is kind of speaks to balance in itself. It's like the balance in Melee in that regard I think is perfect, because it's like and it's sort of like StarCraft. Like I think Brood War is probably the most like similar comparison, right? Where like the game has essentially had 0 updates in like since the Brood War expansion came out, I think. Or maybe there were patch notes after that, but and the game is like still like there's still questions of like, you know, what is truly the best like strategy in that game. Like I'm speaking, I don't know that much about Brood War, right? I just like I work with Hotbit, so you know it bleeds into me. And like I've always been a fan of Brood War in the sense that I've always seen it as like the hardest, like most difficult esport, and it's like probably the most similar to Melee in that it's like aged well and people still play it. And I'd give the balance like a 9. You know, like I think like the small brain like surface level take is to look like there's 26 characters and you can't win with them all. The balance is terrible. But I think the reality is like Melee is probably one of the most balanced games of all time. Like think about the way the game is this way in 20 years later with no patches. So what does that actually say? It's like perfectly balanced in some sense. So that's my take.
So I will pretty much entirely agree. I think people who evaluate, so this is a whole thing that I had a long video about that I never did get to, but there's this idea that people define balance in Melee as like every single character should be viable. And what they don't realize is that's like a fallacy. Like that can't happen, because if you make every single character equally good, someone will inevitably start pushing a certain character, and that character will inevitably have certain advantages over other characters, which will mean that like let's say for example the character is Rock and it just destroys Scissors, or even has like a slight advantage over Scissors. That starts to push Paper up the tier list because Paper is like good against Rock, and this is how like metas are created, right? Like you can't just have everything be equal. And so then they'd say, no, okay, well, I just mean like viable. And it's like, all right, well, we have roughly like half the cast, I'd say you could define as viable. You could break it down to more like 8 characters. But even within that, like for no patches, and to even be in a point where we aren't positive what the best character is, I think this is one of the strongest aspects of Melee, even though casual fans will come in and go like, Melee is so unbalanced, it's terrible, Fox is the best. We all know that's not true, and I think, yeah, probably a 9 or an 8.5 for me as well. What are you thinking, Walt?
All right. Here comes the small brain approach, Aiden. This game is not balanced for me, and I'll tell you why. All you have to do is look at my Twitter today and see some heinous clips of some absolute malarkey happening. But jokes aside, I do actually agree. I'm glad that you brought up Brood War, Aiden, because I think that the two are very similar just in terms of kind of like infinite skill ceiling plus players controlling the meta. It's interesting because I like, again, not super well versed with Brood War, but I do know some things from consuming content about it, where it's kind of like the Zerg meta became a thing, and then like things shifted over time because like one of the Bonchwas started like losing. Like people were figuring out basically like how to beat Zerg, I'm pretty sure.
There's a Day 9 video about it. There's a really good Day 9 video that has a ton of parallels to Melee, where he's explaining like why Brood War is a great game. I'd highly recommend people go watch it. But basically, yeah, I think that's the example. Is like he's saying like how this like for years this one matchup was seen as losing, and like then this one player introduced like one new strategy, and is like, this is actually pretty good. And then it utterly like changed the community's entire perception of like which way that matchup goes. And I think there's another really good video that's sort of, it's similar to those Core videos, but Double Lift and his editor made it, and it's about League. And it's about like one of the problems in League is that the patches don't give the game enough time to like breathe and for people to figure things out. And it's and whereas like games like Brood War, Melee, or even like Dota, who had longer times between their patches, like let people like develop and find ways to like something that initially seemed OP was like actually not. You just had to like find a way around it. And like Melee has like given that time and time and time again.
Yeah, I do think
Yeah.
like the small brain answer is my character is bad and it hurts my heart a lot. I think that yeah, again, like all of the parallels to Brood War are there, and I kind of see that. Personally, I've been seeing that more in full swing. If we want to like zoom in on a specific event, SCL for instance, kind of like the meta of the Falcons developing, where it's like now there's 4 top Falcons. Like Gatsu's kind of made like his big splash into got into D1 from open qualifiers, stayed in D1 for the whole time, like performed relatively well, all things considered, in the main bracket on week 4. And there are like kind of little microcosms of those metas developing in different ways. Like the how do we beat Zane meta, FD is garbage stage meta, all these little things kind of like build on themselves and make for a really robust game, in my opinion. If I was going to give it a number, I mean, again, I don't think it's perfect because the game is 20 years old, but I think that it does a really, really, really good job at making itself as well-rounded as it can be, which is entirely driven by the players. So I think I would give it more like an 8.
One thing I want to add, and I agree with what you guys have said, and I do follow Brood War a bit and followed StarCraft 2 very closely for quite a while, is I think the other thing people don't think about when they talk about balance with Melee is that you can have balance, but what you also want to have is like a diversity of play styles and a diversity of like styles generally, kind of character styles. And you want those character styles to be fun. And so I think like sometimes people will be like, oh man, we want Game and Watch to be good. Why is Game Watch good? It's like, bro, Game and Watch and every other character is like the most annoying, like every other game is the most annoying character. Do we want that? And also like characters like Fox, Falco, Marth, Sheik, you can play them in such different ways and it still is a fun game. And I think if that wasn't the case, like if you could only play like a really aggressive rushdown style, it wouldn't matter how many viable characters there are, because it like the game is only favoring one style and it's like not balanced on a play style level. So I don't think that's the case. I think we are able to do that, and that's why the balance is really good.
I mean, case in point is the Falcons, like that I just mentioned. It's like you have like the Wizzy on one end of the spectrum. I actually have this as like a video script for an upcoming project, but it's like if you were to put all the Falcons on a timeline, you have like Wizzy all the way here in like the defense mode, and then you have like S2J all the way over here in like the I Smoke Crack mode. And then like None is kind of like towards S2J a little bit, or like maybe above or behind in some way, and then like Gatsu is like a little towards Wizzy. Yeah, like it's like way further down. Yeah, it's like, but like that, it's so much. And this maybe bleeds into the character diversity topic a little bit, because I do think that you inherently need to talk about player diversity when you consider characters for Melee.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's funny because I think the short version of this that I have heard people say is like, think about how lucky we are that like Fox, Falco, and like Falcon are like some of the best characters in the game, and like all the like floaty characters and the slow characters are not like broken. I think like when people think about what makes Melee so cool, or you think about like the sets that people introduce people to Melee with, not that like floaty matchups like can't be exciting in a different sort of way, but I think like if floaty, slow, or like campy characters dominated the meta for like the entire lifespan of the game, the game like wouldn't be in the same place, right? But the fact that I think there's this incredible balance struck by the fact that Fox and Falco are seen as like two of the best characters, but they are also like the two most comboable characters that give like low tiers this like viability of like coming back on them, because you could always piece together a massive string on them. Like that is such a good thing. like that's sort of what balances Fox out, right? Is the fact that like he's extraordinarily comboable, and like even if I'm playing a character like Peach, who on paper like does not have as many strengths as Fox, a player like Armada can take that character and abuse that character's punish against the supposed best character to a degree that it makes that character viable. And I sort of think that's sort of the balance of the game, is like the best a lot of the best characters are like fast and cool and have long combo strings, but they also happen to be very comboable, which allows the sort of like characters on the lower end of the spectrum a chance at like beating them. I think there's also an interesting concept of like lower tier characters like having their niche and like preying on a lack of matchup experience, which I actually think is good, even if it bugs me individually as a player. I'm like, fuck, I'm only losing to this because I don't know what to do. Like I hate that feeling, but it's a good thing. And I think I wish I could remember his name right now. He made a wonderful video about spectating about Melee in like 2015, but it's basically like breaking down Amsa versus Mewtwo and how Amsa playing like a lower tier character has this ability to like topple one of the gods of the game, because like he's gotten good enough at a character that not a lot of people have like a lot of practice and experience against, which I think is
it the
another aspect of balance that
is it the
is
Things
really
of
cool.
Beauty video that you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay,
things of
yeah.
beauty. Yes, that
He
video
talks
is
about
fantastic.
knuckleballs, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say like it almost gives the illusion of speed, like when you have like a slower character being able to just like mop the crap out of a Fox and like really like just mess them up, then it like still gives kind of like this perception of like, yeah, this game is really fast paced, like look at how fast Fox is getting deleted. Also to the point of like floaty versus floaty, I think there's something out there for everyone, and that's what makes Melee kind of cool in general. Like I actually love watching floaty matchups, because I feel like it's a play style that we almost never see. Like to your point, Aiden, about a majority of the most played characters being these really fast space animals, like everything's really quick, fast paced, lots of combos. Like to change gears and have like a really position heavy, like it almost goes back to like footsies and Street Fighter type matchup, where you're like, oh, I'm gonna play position and like really figure out how to open my opponent up and figure out their habits and everything like that. It's just such a different type of game, which is really interesting to me.
It's the ratio, I think. It's this. We have a very healthy ratio of stereotypically exciting matchups to watch, complemented by the occasional like slower paced match that requires very different things from the players. And I don't think the game would be in a good space if every set ever was a Peach Ditto. It wouldn't be.
Yeah,
But because the Peach Ditto comes along every once in a while, it's that much more special and that much more interesting, because we get to see Kzoop versus Polish fight an entirely different set than we're watching like most of the time. And that's like, I think that's why it's so cool. It's like this, the game has managed to balance itself like on its own in a weird way.
No, for sure. I think we should move on to character diversity, because it's kind of sort of flowing into what we just said.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way I'm looking at character diversity in terms of like how we evaluate it is sort of like, what characters are we really seeing, not what characters are viable. And I think this actually is an area where some would argue, again, Blur kind of made a viral tweet, viral in the community at least a while back, which probably not exactly accurate, but he was basically saying like, oh man, everything except for Fox, Falco, Marth, Sheik is kind of falling off. I don't think that's true, but what I have been feeling while watching Melee, and again, we haven't seen Amsa for a while, so that's why I'm really excited for Summit, is it does seem like some characters are falling off. You know, it seems like Pikachu. I'm wondering if Axe is going to be able to stay as relevant as he was in 2019. I'm really interested to see how Amsa does. I think that's a bit of a different story, because Amsa's kind of been out of the picture in terms of competitive games. But yeah, what do you guys think? Anyone want to kick this
Radar,
one off?
do you know when Blur said that tweet, for the just like for my own information?
It would have been, let's say it was
Blur tweets.
5 months ago, like November.
Well, because I was gonna say, like, depending on when he tweeted that, you could even argue that like Sheik is probably on that list of like characters that have fallen off. You know, like we really had no Sheik representation until very recently. But that's neither here nor there. I was just curious about like relative timeline on when that was said, because I was wondering if that's when before or after we got like the influx of all the J Sheiks in this world.
It would have been, yeah, it was like late 2020, but I think he did mention like Sheik Marth, Fox Falco. That was what he kind of was saying, like, this is all I'm seeing right now, which was or was not true.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Aiden, what do you think about character diversity right now?
I think it's worse than it was, but only because a few critical players have sort of like fallen off the map. And like it's always been the case that there have been less mains for certain characters. But aside from the wobbling ban, which is I think probably the biggest reason we don't see Ice Climbers players, because like just off the top of my head, like quite a few of Ice Climbers players basically like quit because of that. But I think other players have like dropped off the face of competition for other reasons that were like propelling certain characters forward. So like if we just look at Peach, right? Triff is in Europe and was wrapping up his degree and I think like his master's thesis, so he couldn't play. So there goes Triff, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this like online time. Laud busy with medical school, can only enter so much. Laud's basically not at most tournaments. So it's up to the other Peach players that were lower ranked and active already to like fill the gap and like improve fast enough to replace them. I don't think it's this issue that I think Blur is kind of hinting at of like the meta pushing them out. It was just very circumstantial that like a few, like the two best Peach mains and then the best Peach main before them all basically stopped playing in the span of like 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the same goes for like other characters where like we just don't see Amsa because he's in Japan. We don't see Axe because he's like doesn't like net play and is like not good at net play. I don't think that Axe will struggle as much once we get back to LAN personally. Like if I had to guess by the way he plays the game, I feel like it's very reaction heavy, and I imagine he's more susceptible to the issues of online playing with that character. I would expect him to come back to form. And like thinking about, so pretty much every character that isn't Ice Climbers has only like disappeared because of like these circumstantial things. And like I think it's a big thing where like if we do look at even just those three characters, right? When we lose three characters like that, it seems really significant because there was only really a pool of like 12-ish characters that could really compete at the highest level to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And so like when those circumstances strike a few individuals, it just seems like it has a much heavier impact. And I don't think we're not struggling with like the meta pushing those characters out so much as just like we're in like a bad time, just circumstantially a bad time for these other characters. And I think we're also lucky enough that the characters who are kind of like dominating things right now and the characters that most people consider very exciting and intricate to watch. So like sure, the meta has like kind of boiled down to like these 6 characters. Like I feel like it's very Falcon, Marth, Fox, Falco, Sheik, and then kind of Puff-ish. And like
yes.
Those 6 characters are kind of like the top level of every tournament right now.
Mm-hmm.
But between all those characters, there's a huge diversity of outcomes and play styles. Like even Sheik, like you mentioned like Sheik having fallen off, but I think like in a weird way, and we're in a sort of a Sheik renaissance,
Yeah,
especially
it's
when
definitely
LAN
coming
comes back.
now.
Yeah.
Because face roll was getting really, really good, right?
Mm-hmm.
He just doesn't like playing online. Spark will like come back from Pakistan eventually, and like he was on the cusp of like being top 15 as well. We have like Jmook, we have Ben. Like I would argue we have more Sheik talent than ever, which we didn't have before.
Right.
And I think like Blur's tweet, he was just really zoning in on like top 8s and like not really looking at the field or thinking about who's gonna come up in the next year. And that's like kind of what bothered me. I was like, dude, I feel like you don't look past, and I get what he's saying. Like if he's going to defend that point, the average Melee spectator is probably only watching the top 8s or like the highest level, but it's like it goes deeper than that, right? And you have to think about it more. So if I had to actually give this a number, by the way, like right now, I'd probably give it like a 6 or a 7. But I expect this to get better when we come back to LAN.
6 or 7. We need to know.
6.
6.5.
All right, 6. One thing, to Blur's credit is I'm sure he made this tweet like last year, didn't think much about it, and even fucking 6 months later, we're like, man, fucking Blur.
Yes. I do want to touch on, and I do agree with pretty much every point you said, Aiden. There was an interesting comment from Rama Noodles in the chat, and I think if we were to look at character diversity holistically and not just kind of like the top level, it does get very interesting because I think this also ties into the matchmaking point of this report card in that he writes, I think mid tiers and low tiers will go up when ranking happens. A lot of quit outs in unranked and general matchmaking, I think, just happen if you see a low tier. You're like, I don't want to play them, because you can kind of like pick and choose what matchups you want to work on when you're playing unranked, or if you just like, I don't know. I said this in the last Mixup episode. I had a Luigi quit on me. I play Mario. Like, why'd you quit on me?
That's so funny.
It's like,
that's so funny. Fuck that person, by the way. I can't believe anybody who has the audacity to quit on a low tier when they play a low tier. Insane. Also, I never forgive low tiers. I don't know if I'm complaining or creating a crossover that doesn't exist, but I have low tiers out on me after one game all the time. And I also see this field of low tier mains on Twitter complaining about how nobody will play them. And it's like, maybe you just want to fucking win, dude. Maybe you don't actually care.
Right.
And because I'll play you. I'll sit there and I'll beat your terrible Game & Watch over and over again. And I will chain grab it mercilessly because you shouldn't be playing Game & Watch. That's how I feel inside. I have a rage inside me when I play against Game & Watch. And then they quit out after like 1 or 2 games. It's like, oh, you clearly don't care about getting better. So
that's right.
Worth mentioning, by the way, just to give some context for that Twitch comment, when they say ranked, they mean like ranked in Slippy, not ranked as in like ranked. They said ranks, but not like ranked players. Because I do agree that, like once you have ranked games and you get punished for leaving, people are going to be playing low tiers more. I think one thing I do want to add, maybe to be devil's advocate, to hit the kind of counterpoint, is I do think there is some level of meta development pushing out certain characters. Probably the best example of this is Samus. I know obviously Samus is a character that like we lost Hugs, and Duck started playing less. Duck switched to Sheik though before he stopped playing less. So that was happening even before that. And I do again, I guess this is one of those things where you could easily disprove it just by like things changing, but I do wonder like if certain characters will start to struggle to kind of hang on in the sort of more developed area, particularly because you can play against them with rollback so easily. Like, I feel like you touched on how low tiers lack of knowledge can really, really help you, but it's even more helpful when you're a character that's already pretty good, and then that lack of knowledge, like something like a Fox versus Samus, and
so it's kind of like it's a cycle, though. I think you are right, and your ability to get practice against virtually any character definitely improves definitely increases the likelihood of that person being like slowly pushed out or away from that character. But then after a long enough period of no top level presence of that character, people who are continuing to play that character have a better shot against people because they don't have as good of practice anymore. So I think it's kind of like this. That's how I feel about Amsa and Yoshi. Is like, from what I'm seeing, none of the top players are taking the time to play the like kind of level below Yoshi's right now. And I think Amsa is going to do really well at Smash Summit. I think so. That's my call. I could entirely be wrong, but like, because like clearly nobody's taking the time to practice against good Yoshis at the moment, and the best Yoshi has been sitting in the wings for a long time, and he is grinding. I think Amsa is going to do really well for that reason, and it's sort of an example, hopefully an example of this pattern that I imagine exists in my head.
Yeah, something else that
by the way,
kind of... Oh, go ahead.
6 for me. So 6 for character diversity. Walt, carry us through.
Interesting. I have a kind of side point that's related to character diversity, and I know like the point I made earlier kind of ties in the matchmaking and whatnot as well, since you can kind of like curate your opponents and whatnot. Something that kind of like, it doesn't bother me per se, but it's something that I would love to see more, and I think we started to get a glimpse of it in week 4 of SCL, where Mango kind of brought out the dual mains again. I would love to see, in terms of character diversity, character counter picks being kind of like a staple in metas. It's kind of unrealistic to ask for something like that, I'm aware. but I do think it makes for interesting gameplay diversity. I think there's a later point that you have in the presentation, Radar, for kind of just like player and storylines and narratives. Because it's like, I don't know, imagine back in the day, like when Armada was secretly training a young Link to counterpick Hungrybox's Puff. Like, how freaking cool is that? Like, you know, a character that no one ever sees, and, you know, we get to see it at the highest level at the time. You know, again, something that's like really hard to do, I think, in this day and age, but it is something that I think lends itself to a higher rating of character diversity if we were to kind of put this out on the report card.
I would love to see more counterpicking. I was reminiscing about a set from a New York local from almost 4 years ago now, last night. And it was a local when Adam from the Netherlands was in New York, and he went to a Long Island tournament. And him and Slox play 3 sets across winners and grands. They play 13 games, and they both play 3 characters across the 13 games, counterpicking each other back and forth. They both play Fox, Falco, and Sheik, counterpicking each other over and over and over. Fucking amazing. I remember watching it at the time. I was like, this is incredible. This is like the first time I've ever seen this. I think it's the first and only time I've ever seen that.
Yeah, I think the problem that the game has, and this kind of sort of puts itself into balance as well, but like a lot of games have this issue where there are certain strategies or characters or compositions that are good in certain niche scenarios, but you could learn a different strategy, character, composition that's good in many more scenarios. Pardon?
I said that's just easier also. Like, it's just the execution is less taxing. But
exactly. So like the thing that Melee struggles with realistically, and this is how it ties into the character diversity stuff, is that like there are actually several characters in the game that if you're not evaluating them from a solo main perspective, and Young Link is a great example, they have these kind of niche matchups that might be worth like looking into. But why not just learn Fox? Why not just learn Falco? And that's kind of the downside.
I think there's kind of a decent example of that in Ice when he was still playing Sheik, and there was this brief period where Ice was trying to play Zelda against Puff in neutral. Or no, Sheik in neutral against Puff. And then it put Zelda at high percents, and then he was like, wait, what if I just play Fox?
Dreffen still does that and it works. So proven. Honestly, it stood the test of time.
I'll say it. Ice is better than Dreffen has ever been. So
yeah. So
test of results.
Oh,
so Walt, what's your number? Can you give us one?
Yeah, I just pulled up the 13th official Melee NTSC tier list just to kind of get a visual on what characters we've lost. If we're talking current era, like as of today, I would say that it's probably like a 6 in my opinion, because it's like it's not terrible, but it's also still like, you know, a top 8, I think, of an online event, we would still very likely get like 5 to 6 characters if all of the, you know, top ranked players came in, which is awesome. Prior to COVID, I probably would have given this like an 8, because a top 8 of a national, we would probably get 8 unique characters, which is insane to think about. Even if it's the same 8 characters every time, that's still, you know, diverse enough for me to be happy with kind of like where the game is at, where it's not completely dominated by whoever the best character is on paper at the time. But I think for this current time, it could definitely be improved. And I am with Aiden, where I see that number going up as live events come back again. And some of these people come back out of the woodwork, like our, you know, Samus's, Luigi's, Axe's, Amsa's, and maybe the Ice Climbers that don't wobble.
Yeah. You know what's an exciting thing, just like top of mind, is Elliot mentioned this to me last night, but a really, really promising player from the Pacific Northwest was Fohibro, and he was a really, really strong Ice Climbers player. And one of his literally best tournament performance ever, as I think, Walt, you have this included in a
Battle of BC
in a video. Yeah,
that's right.
It happened, and that was he didn't wobble at his best tournament performance. He had a ton of good performances before that, but at the one where wobbling was banned that he went to, he did amazing. And Elliot was mentioning that when LAN comes back, he thinks he's going to come back. He just like quit during this like period of online Melee. And if somebody like, I think Foe has a lot of potential, even as someone who doesn't wobble. And I think that's a character that's been hit the hardest of any character, right? So, and Slug has even proven himself that like these things are possible. So I can't
Fun
wait
fact
to land.
actually about Ice Climbers, because I know you mentioned you haven't really watched a ton of other Melee streams. We were pretty close to having Chudat qualify for SCL, just so you know. Because
Wait.
Radar and I were casting Levo,
yeah.
and Chudat was like 1 or 2 sets away from getting in.
What?
Yeah, and he actually had a Ditto, I think, against Slug, which was a shame
Slug,
because it was loser side Ditto. So one of the 2 Ice Climbers players at Levo got eliminated. But the whole time, dude. We were in the call, me, Radar, and Leffen, and I was like, oh my god, imagine a world where Chudak gets into SCL, like, and you know, probably has to play like a tough matchup, but still, that'd be amazing just to think about.
Holy shit, dude.
So they're not abundant, but they are still out here in some capacity, I would say, at least. I mean, Chudat's been playing for, you know, since the Stone Age, so there's still Ice Climbers that exist, and I agree that I do think there will be more like the Fohebros of the world that kind of come back when in-person returns.
With that
this
being
run
said,
is wild.
let's move on to matchmaking. I think we want to get through the next couple a little quicker. Not that
Sure.
not that I'm trying to like curve the discussion. I think these ones won't take as much time, which is good. So matchmaking basically meaning how good is the game at matching you with another player, ideally of the same skill, ideally of a character you want to play, which is something we've already touched on a bit and definitely worth bringing up. And yeah, you know, kind of ranked matchmaking can sort of fall into that. That's its own thing. But yeah, just how easy is it to get into a game and get into a game that you want to play?
I think that it's so funny because it seems almost disingenuous to like come at this question without the context of like we've been blessed with this one man's work who, you know, oh, there's more people on the Slippy team, Nikki, Uncle Punch, you know, a bunch of wonderful people. But the idea that one man coded this wonderful thing for us. However, if we were to compare this to like some sort of modern game, there's obviously like some pitfalls with it. And I think the main thing is like it's only unranked right now. I think that the matches happen really quickly. The matchmaking or like the hidden MMR that he introduced, huge quality of life upgrade. Because I noticed like I just get like way harder opponents all the time.
Yeah.
And like that's made the experience a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
I would honestly give this like the speed at which you get into games and like the quality of play and the hidden MMR. I'm gonna say 7. I think, and like all that's really missing is like a functional and like good ranked mode. That's probably the only bad thing. Because like as soon as you have ranked, right, you have like more competitive sets and less people who quit out on you, which are pretty much the major problems.
Yeah, that Luigi's not quitting once rank comes out. I guarantee it.
Yeah, exactly.
It is like crazy to think about. Like imagine, like, isn't it so insane to think that we were using, and no disrespect to Anther, but because, you know, the system that they built was also incredible for the time and everything, but isn't that so crazy to think about that, you know, probably just over a year ago now, we were typing in netplay codes and like using, you know, like chat rooms and random forums to like find opponents and stuff like that. Just so weird
it
to
all
me.
turned around so quickly. It was actually funny because I don't think I would have played barely any Melee last year without the rollback introduction, because the house we were at had like such shitty internet that I couldn't play delay-based netcode anymore. And I used to play the fuck out of Anthers. Like in Seattle, I grinded Anthers all the time. And I just had to stop playing because the internet was too bad. And then a month later, the update dropped.
On Anthers.
The update on just like the Slippy update.
No, but what was when you were on Anthers Ladder? What was your username, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, my username? I had what was I on that? Oh no, dude, this is sad that I can't remember. I think I just my alt, the one that I made people's lives terrible on was called Grime King, and I just tried to play as shitty as possible. Which is, you know, admittedly not very nice to do, but
No, it's good.
You have to get the anger out somehow, right? So
Where did
Just
the
wondering
name?
because
Maybe I was just like
close.
Master Calvin 45 or something like that. I don't know. I don't know why I
Hmm.
can't remember this.
I think, yeah, I would also probably rank matchmaking very high. Particularly, it's easy to compare to where it was and where it is now and really see the benefits. But I do think, like, if you play other games, in terms of queue times, we do amazingly. Like, we
Oh
do
my
amazing.
god.
The
Dude,
queue
League of
time,
Legends. I'm so glad I quit that
any
game, by the way, but
Overwatch, StarCraft, whatever. Like, Hearthstone, like, obviously again we're not playing ranked as we start if we have a rank system, if you're a higher elo you'll probably have longer queues,
yeah.
but even still, and rank will also split the queue time, by the way, so that some people will be queuing into rank, some people, so it will make the queues probably longer. But I think that's really really good. I don't think the only thing I would be critical of is probably if I played a character people liked less. I do think my matchmaking experience would be worse. So
What are
if
you
I
trying
was
to
like
say,
a Nest
man?
player or something, yeah, yeah,
Just say it,
is there
man.
is there a person on this podcast that plays a
Hey,
character that
speak
people
with
would
your
like to
chest,
play?
man. I don't need you skirting around the
Yeah,
topic in
is
front of
there?
me.
Well, tell us, what is it like as you queue into as a Mario player? What is it like when you go on ranked?
It's like looking into just a sea of Falco players, and it's just never ending. You know that like meme of like oops all like spider eggs or whatever. It's like oops all Falcos and like just fucking lasers coming out and everything like that. Um, it is crazy. I only get matched with Falcos, and
Do
they
people
all
put out
beat
of
me.
what?
They are all better than me by a lot. Yeah, I get quit out on a lot. If people like, because I use my YouTube name, so if people like recognize me and they're like, oh, I get to beat up Turn Down for Wall because he plays a fucking dumpy character, then they'll be like, oh yeah, and they'll taunt right away, and we'll get like some good sets in, and then I'll go. I do get quit out on a lot though. I think like holistically, matchmaking is actually really good. All jokes aside, specifically like for the layman like me who's like not super duper interested in playing at a high level, but like just enjoys the game a lot. Unranked is just amazing. Like the fact that I can just press one button and find an opponent in like less than 30 seconds most of the time is insane. It's probably
15 seconds most of the
yeah,
time.
I
It's
think if we were to
insane.
put it against like other games, like you were saying, Radar, it probably would be like far and away the fastest queue time online game.
Yeah.
Which again, like, kind of just piles on to how completely insane this is because it's a 20-year-old game that did not have functional or very functional online just over a year ago. So that's really cool to me. Overall, I think it's really good. I think like the hidden MMR that we mentioned is functional. It works well. The matches are relatively competitive, even in unranked, where it can feel like a challenge, or you feel like you're going back and forth with someone, and the games are good. And if you're like washing someone, it's fine. If you're getting washed, it's fine. Like that's all part of Melee anyway. It's the same as I consider it the same as in person, where you're gonna sit at a setup and like not realize you're against like some hidden boss from like Wisconsin or whatever, who's like number one is gonna absolutely wax you. But then you can also sit down with someone who's going to their first tournament ever and is terrible at the game, but is just there to have fun. You're gonna get like a variety no matter what, and I think online's no different when it comes to that.
All right, so what's your number? What are you landing on? Because I
Like
think I'm 7 as well.
yeah, like 7 is like kind of the medium ballpark, and I think that number increases when rank comes out, probably closer to like 8 or 9 even, because I do think like it can only get better from here.
No, yeah, sounds good. All right, so I'm gonna just update the doc, so we should have some stuff now up, if you don't mind refreshing that. But let's move on to player systems. This is the one that people might not be as familiar with. I obviously introduced this before, but this is the idea of like things that kind of are built in to make the game a bit better, make kind of reward players. I think the chat system is one of them, but stuff like achievements is a really good example. Ranks is a good example. Obviously, that's part of matchmaking as well. Things that kind of you can, like even a chat system, just systems that are related to players in some way. Does that make sense? I'm sure chat can give other examples, but this is an area I think where, again, I'm not trying to harp on Fizzy here, but like I think the game is lacking a bit, just objectively. But if does anyone want to start this?
Yeah, I was gonna say I think that it actually this is probably something I'd give a pretty low rating to, at least at this moment in time. Just because even something as innocuous as like the first thing that comes to mind, just thinking off the top, is like Xbox 360 achievements, because you mentioned achievements, Radar. Just something that like at least acknowledges that the player has a pulse and is playing the game. You know, it's like, oh, congrats on playing 5,000 Slippy games. Go outside. Congrats on playing 10,000 Slippy games. You are still the exact same rank as you were before. You should totally go outside. It's like, but you know, something like that. It's not like it doesn't make or break the the gameplay or the immersion for people like us who are really deeply rooted in the game. But I think if we talk about to kind of quote Atrioc on his bit with Toph, the top of that marketing funnel, it's like something like as innocuous as that. It seems stupid to some people who are really into the game, but it actually can have some level of effect in getting people more interested in the game than they already are, especially if they're brand new, in my opinion. I think I have more thoughts on this, but I'm going to let someone else talk right now. I think, kind of shooting from the hip, if I was going to give this a number, I would probably give this like a 3, to be honest. I don't think there's really anything that has been done in terms of Slippy specifically, outside of kind of like the chat logs that we just got added in pretty recently.
Yeah, do you want to go first, Aiden, or should I take a shot at it?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is like pretty brief. I think I agree with most of what Walt said. I think like we can all say this is like not in a great spot. I think it's sort of the nature of the game. Like, I think if you look at Melee as a casual product, it actually has like a ton of these things that are kind of like cool. But like what we've kind of turned the game into in like this esports environment does not have those things. So I would say like a 2.
Yeah, I think I'm also leaning towards low stuff. I think one thing I would love to see, and again, so many things Fizzy's working on. It'd be cool if there was a way for a third party person to kind of figure this out. Is just like some kind of, even achievement doesn't feel the right word, but say for example you got like 3 0 to deaths in a single game or something, and it was like, oh, you just did that, and you can show like and share or something, like you get this crazy achievement of like never get
What
like
did this? There was an event that did it. It was GTX that had like the GTX First Blood, like little lower third that would come up, and it was so stupid to me. But at the same time, I was like, this is so sick, because this, to me, that's like kind of what brings tournament production to like at least a little bit of a higher notch, where it's like, when I watch, again, like I reference the LCS a lot because I draw a lot of inspiration from how they format their content and everything like that. But it's like, oh, we're gonna bring it over to the State Farm analyst desk, or like, let's talk about the power play brought to you by like Geico or whatever.
The Red Bull Baron play.
Yeah,
Dude.
exactly. Like, so stuff like that is just so cool to me as someone who like really wants to see this game like reach a, like, I guess, quote unquote more professional level. But I totally agree with you, Radar. I just wanted to say I think it was GTX where they added in like a little animation that came in. Whoever got the first stock in the set, they would be like, oh, like the GTX First Blood like goes to Mango or whatever.
That's so funny.
Yeah, no, so that's the thing. I would love to see something like that. I feel like, because everyone talks about ranked and wanting to be, like ranking up to whatever the grandmaster or challenger or whatever of Smash is. But I also think there is something, like, sometimes I'll do stuff and think like, man, I need some, like, no one saw this crazy thing, or there was no acknowledgement of just how fucking good that shit was. Like, even like APM or something, like, it's like, do you like know how much glint I got there, or like whatever, right? And so that's something I'd love to see in some capacity. I think the existence of Clippy, being able to like make combo videos and stuff through that, like, that's pretty cool. It's sort of a third party system, but yeah, I'm gonna give it like a 2.5, I guess. A 2. I'm gonna give it a 2.
Oh, the other thought I wanted to add to that, and this kind of ties into the following slide on like YouTube content. This is more so just a cry for help to Fizzy. Like you said, Radar, ways to incorporate stats and just kind of a more robust replay system would be kind of systems that I would really enjoy personally, to be able to kind of frame by frame advance. We kind of already have that in some regards, but it's not like totally integrated. Like I know that it's the Slippy Replay Launcher as a separate program from actually Slippy itself, but I think if there are ways to improve on things that actually help create more like analysis or avenues for analysis, that would be really interesting to me personally.
Actually, bringing up the replays is a good example of a player system that
Yeah.
I think is working. So, maybe I'll round mine up to 3, just to keep it we'll give them a little bit of extra credit because that stuff is useful. Let's move into game content. This is another one that by design Melee is not going to do as well at, but this is stuff like stages, characters, custom game modes, content like skins, that kind of things. Just stuff that's like new. And obviously 20-year-old game, what are you going to get? But what do you guys think on this issue?
It's funny because I think again this is something that the game itself is actually pretty good about in a casual perspective. Like you look at Melee in 2001 as a casual fan, game content, this game kills it. It's got a lot of content in it. But the problem is like, or like not really the problem, but we're like talking about like Melee in like an esports like lens. And I think we definitely like the content that we do have is all sort of like unofficial and it's like add-ons. It can be complicated, like relatively complicated to add, even though like functionally it's like if you just follow the steps, it's actually pretty simple. And I think unfortunately this is like pretty low. I think like I have to give credit for like the extra game modes and like the ability to like just build entirely new characters into the game. Those things that are like slowly being discovered now. And like we've always had like packs like 20XX, like from the original 20XX training pack to like tournament edition, and now Uncle Punch's training mode. To give credit to those things and like note that those things exist, I think we're in a pretty good spot where like modifications and extra content that way are really great. But like naturally built into the game and like being accessible, it's not the same. And so I'd give it like a 4. I'll say a 4.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty similar. I think like like that's the thing is it's like there's these amazing things outside the game that I still want to count. Like Uncle Punch is amazing. 20XX was amazing. It's still useful. I still use it all the time. All the replay stuff. Van City Primal, your skins are amazing. Like I'm blown away by some of the stuff that you're doing. I
Love
in
that
the
guy.
chat. Oh my God, they are so good, man. Like so there is stuff there that I think like I would not give this like a 1 or 2 or 3. There is content. The fact that we have Wolf that's playable for me, like feels crazy for Melee to even have a new character, even if it's not something that's like everyone's playing. I'm like, it's still like a thing, and there's a whole new build coming out of the, I can't remember the name. It's like something with an A. The Akania,
Yeah.
work on the branding.
Kenya. I don't know how they pronounce it.
Yeah, exactly. But I
Just
think I'm
meme
gonna
on
give
their
this.
Twitter all the time.
I think I'm gonna give this a. See, the thing is like you compare it to other stuff. It's hard if do you want to count the stuff that's like in the game truly, or like I don't know.
Yeah, it's difficult to judge in a way that is not for a game like League, right? Because League is just this entire official package that has all these things in it with official game modes, and we're kind of at this weird crossroads where like of course Nintendo is not going to change or update this game. Of course. That's never the expectation. The real question is like to what degree can we community create these things and add them in sort of like an official capacity without like raising too many red flags. And right now there's no official, like as far as official competition goes, like what the majority of the player base plays and practices on, it's this default Slippy build, right? Which does not include most of those things. And like I think like when I say 4, it's kind of acknowledging that our baseline version of the game is this, and then we have a bunch of stuff kind of around it that like raises my score by a small point, but it isn't integrated into the main build yet, and understandably so.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that it's like if we look at what we have right now, and again, we kind of have been pointing to Van City Primal a lot because he's been putting in a lot of really, really good work for creating skins and just really aesthetically pleasing things that I'm sure the Melee player base would be interested in seeing kind of like fully developed and kind of more fleshed out in an official sense. Um, yeah, like I would personally rank this quite high actually, but the thing that holds it back tremendously is the fact that we have to tiptoe around Nintendo um, for everything on that. It makes it so hard because and I want to give a shout out to Wisely in the chat with an incredible suggestion of like the idea that we can kind of have, and this ties into what we were talking about just before with player systems, where it's like if we could have an achievement system where it's like, oh, okay, you won 50 games and you unlock a skin for the character that you're playing. That would be super, super cool. And then that also ties into kind of the esports and community tabs that we have coming up after this gameplay one, where it fills into not only an achievement system, you can have a microtransaction system, you can have ways to actually generate revenue for the community that actually go back to people like Vancity Primal who are putting in independent work to make things like these possible. That's really interesting to me, but it's something that can kind of like never happen at this point, as long as Nintendo kind of has this vice grip over the community or the game. It makes it a little bit challenging. I do think from like the esports perspective, it gets kind of cool where since it's client side, you can spectate someone watching their run through of a bracket, and then they can still use like whatever skins they want. And then when it gets played back on something like a Beyond the Summit Smash, we have kind of everything vanilla and pretty so that, we don't ruffle any feathers from the corporate side, but we can still kind of have our fun or have our cake and eat it too, I guess, when it comes to some of this unique content that these people are putting out.
No,
for a number,
sure.
I'd give it a 4.
4? All right. We got the 4. So
that's largely because of Nintendo, I think.
So that rounds off the first section. We have a balance at an 8.5, matchmaking at 7. I have been rounding up, by the way, across the averages, and like to a 0.5 or up. Character diversity is a 6. Game content is a 5. Player systems is 2.5. So
Oof.
That's how the game is doing. Overall, I think you guys would probably agree with me that I think the game is in a good place. I think the game is doing very well.
Oh, yeah.
Even if there's some stuff that we could work on, unlike in Melee, I think it's a pretty good game. I don't know about you guys. But let's go to the next section, which is community.
It is funny to imagine like how absolutely brutal that card probably would have looked if Slippy didn't come out.
Yeah.
Like everything would be like a 0 across the board.
Yes.
Would have been really bad.
But yeah, so going on to community, I don't know which one you want to get started with, Radar.
Yeah, so I'll just introduce the categories. Events is kind of like sort of not just... See, this is tricky because of COVID, and I think we got to acknowledge that that is sort of the state we're in.
Mm-hmm.
But events is kind of like the stuff where you're kind of meeting or interacting with people. So it could be a tournament. It could be like online thing. It just something that's like social in nature is I think how I'm kind of defining this. Like tournaments, but not purely from the esports perspective, more from like how are we doing it, like building a scene where people like kind of get together, like build a community. Player education is kind of what it sounds like. What is it like if you're a new player and you come into the game and you want to learn stuff? Like how accessible is that? Player population is just how many people do we think we have in the scene? Is it growing? Is it a good number? Is it shrinking? Is it a bad thing? YouTube content, how good is the content on YouTube right now? Twitch content, how good is the content on Twitch? So yeah, we'll probably get started with what do you want to start with, Walt?
We just go with the first one, just go events for now, because I do think that one is kind of a bit cut and dry when it comes. I think there's obviously the huge caveat of the pandemic and COVID being a thing. So obviously, if this were in-person events as something we were rating, it'd be okay, big fat goose egg. But for when it comes to kind of like the online era and what that means for the ability to kind of plan things and plan especially more accessible events where you don't have to worry about travel costs or venue reservations or any type of overhead cost in general, like bringing setups. And I mean, of course, Aiden, you're probably the expert when it comes to planning any of these things in the group of the three of us. So I'd love to hear what you think about that.
I think if I had to give this a rating, it would probably be like a 4. I think like overall the landscape's like really bad right now as far as like events that quote unquote like matter, and I'm like making that judgment call based off of like what attracts attention and viewership and like larger conversation. I think unfortunately, like when you look at like the past year-ish, so basically since Smash Summit 9, which is like the last big tournament we had before COVID hit, we've really only had that have like gotten like old major viewership. We've had LACS, and then we had not even the first season of SCL really. Like that did okay. Like that was probably, it's in the kind of this small field of events that managed to break like 10, 15K. But like really just LACS, Smash Summit 10, LACS 3, and then this season of the Slippy League. So like we only have like 4 majors, if you look at it that way, that have happened in the span of the last year, when we usually have like enough majors to kind of get around to something like once a month, once every 2 months ish. And I think that's a bad spot to be in. Like unfortunately, for whatever reason, like there have not been online events that have like spun up the level of conversation that LAN events did. Understandably so. I think Big House Online would have accomplished something like pretty large. I think if it had happened, I think similar to Smash Summit, which I think really just had that high of viewership because of like the legacy. Like you can talk about like the production or the tournament format or whatever was good about it in like a practical sense, right? But a lot of tournaments are capable of like producing something similar, like Galint, for instance. Like I think Galint does a really good job, right? But why is there like a 40,000 difference in like peak viewership? It just has a lot to do with legacy, especially when it comes to an online event. So unfortunately I'd rate this like pretty low. I think like we've done our best to kind of like fill the gaps like where possible, and we're a community with not a lot of money and resources, but I'm going to give it a 4.
I actually want to ask you, Aiden, and I think this ties into Twitch content as well, because you mentioned peak viewership. How do you feel about like, because I think we talked about this in the episode with Golden Guardians Radar, where I mentioned that I felt like there was kind of a pretty drastic drop in terms of peak viewership, at least when online events kind of started to be a thing. Like maybe it's mellowed out a bit, but I don't really have the full spectrum of information when it comes to that. What do you think about kind of like the viewership? Because I always felt like it was very high when we were doing in-person events, but I guess the argument that I was making in the last episode was that we kind of have a different split of viewership now, where you can have the mainstream on BTS, for instance, and then you can also have every single player hosting their own individual run, and that kind of contributes to the bottom line of viewership as well. And then like we get, Ludwig, who watches it and just doubles our viewership for, just because he can. So it's interesting where it kind of like comes from a lot of different branches of users now, as opposed to just like one hub for a channel.
Yeah. So I think overall, even with that context in mind, I would say broader, if we wanted to just like pan over to Twitch content and maybe do these both at the same time, I think Twitch content is in a better space than it's been in a long time, mostly because of Slippy. The resurgence in individual player streams is like pretty obvious. You can see this just by the number of players who have a lot of subs and are able to make a living off of like playing Melee on Twitch right now. This is actually way higher than it's ever been, as far as I can tell. And that's a fantastic thing. Like the amount of people that like the fact that Cody has like over 2,000 subs and None has over 2,000 subs. This is kind of a level we thought we'd never get to, because as far as like subscribers and people who are really successful on Twitch, right? That didn't really extend beyond this like group of like top 4 or 5-ish players that we all known for a long time. So that's one thing to note. I think that's really positive. It speaks well to our Twitch content. Also, the viewership for Melee as just like a loose category, and like the viewer minutes for the game, I think are pretty good. If I recall, they may even be like up this past year, if I remember someone telling me that. And I think it's because of the constant like personal streams that we have that sort of fill this gap. Melee's a category that now pretty much always has 3,000 plus viewers, instead of like, dude, we were below 1,000 all the time before. Because there are never like enough tournaments to like fill that gap. However, the difference now is that even when you take into account these personal streams, and then how viewership is sort of for individual events may be broader across multiple channels, the peak or like the average viewership for events is like way down.
Yep.
And you can see that at the peaks for the, so even taking into Ludwig, our channel, and Mango's channel, SCL2 is the highest viewership peak for an online Melee event, or an online Smash event, period,
Like 50.
since COVID has started. And it hit 65K across everything, right? Smash Summit 9 was higher than that, and Genesis was a lot higher than that.
Yeah.
And those were the two last big offline events we had before that, right? And I think like this happens with other esports too, is just like LAN makes it all more special, I think.
Yeah.
There's just something about it being online that makes it matter less. And it being physically in person, I bet we see an 80K plus peak for this Smash Summit 11. That's my bet.
Yeah. I think you're gonna boom. I do have a worry, and Radar, I want to hear what you think about this too, but I think my big concern when you make a point like that, though, Aiden, is that is it a world where if our events number increases, our Twitch content number decreases? Because I worry that if LAN events are consistent again come 2022, for instance, then we lose out on those individual streams because they just can't happen, you know, when people are at the event.
I don't think they will. I don't think they will.
Why do you think that?
It's sort of like a policing problem. The players are only going to go to the events that are most valuable to them, and they still have like the whole week to stream. So like if you look at somebody like Cody, I imagine he'll probably attend like one major event ish a month. Like if you broke it down, you could probably ask him personally, but this is just an example that I think will like befall like a lot of other players. He won't go to like locals anymore. I think that's the reality. It's like these players aren't going to go to locals. It's just more valuable to practice at home and stream and make more money and get better practice, right? Sure. But he'll still go to like a big tournament for the sake of like competing, ranking, being a professional player, and then he has all that other time in between the major tournament he goes to each month to stream and keep that stream alive. I think like the advent of like Slippy and the success of these streamers, like they aren't going to walk away from that, because it's their main source of income in a lot of ways. And I think all of these top level players are going to keep streaming. And then when it comes to events like Smash Summit, for instance, or even perhaps other major tournaments that might make a similar move, like we have streaming setups for players at the tournament, right? So if they want to stream throughout the weekend, that's at least available to them at the tournament. And I think that'll be kind of like one of those quality of life arms races that TOs will go through, is like, we got to have a couple streaming setups in the back if we want these professional players to show up. And I think that's going to be part of it. It's just like, it's a natural part of this transition. It's, you know, like those streams aren't going to go away because they play such a huge role in that person's livelihood now. They can't just like leave that behind.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's cool to see that they have the stream setups too at events. I can definitely see that becoming more of a thing. I think, I would probably also give this a low score. I do think it was cool that we had like 5 days of Melee this year, and I think we've been seeing some more events, especially like different format events pop up with online. So I think in some ways it's been better, but you know, we don't have locals, which is big. Like I think just looking at this from a community building perspective, especially, I think it's kind of hurting. So I'm going to give it a 4 as well. Well, what do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I would guess that it's it's pretty low, obviously, from what we said, you know, think about COVID and all that jazz. But I guess just to your point that you just made, Aiden, do locals just die when we have in-person events coming back? Because it's like, right now I'm going to give it a 4, but... Fucked. Yeah, so it's like, if especially, you know, we talk very top level, I think, when it comes to it, because those are the people that impact the esports scene at large. But, you know, we still got to consider kind of the everyman when it comes to keeping people interested in the game and keeping the general population of players high. And that really scares the shit out of me when you're saying, like, you know, an IBDW or, you know, Mango or whoever is competing at the top level at the time is like, yeah, you know, I'm just not going to participate in locals anymore because I can just make way more money streaming. And that was the argument years ago, where I remember, I think it was Mango who said, like, I lose so many subs by going to a national
Yeah.
even. So it's like if that trickles back to just like I can't even go to a tournament anymore, and then I'm gonna plan out my big tournaments that go on, that really worries me about that number, the events number potentially going up in the future.
Yeah, I think the weeklies are going to be in a really rough spot, unfortunately. Also, do
Agreed.
we want to say the Twitch content number in the same kind of in the
I
same
think we might as well
thing?
because we're kind of
Yeah, that's
touching on
fine.
it. Like, we can probably let's do the events number. Waltz, what's your event number?
Yeah, I'm gonna just go with you guys and kind of make it an even four as
Across
well.
the
I
board?
think that
All
it
right.
has a lot of room for improvement, but the problem is like, are we actually gonna see improvement? And I do think that it's right now it's a little inversely proportional with Twitch content. So I'm glad we're doing those
Yeah.
together.
Twitch
So
content, I
Twitch
think, is
content.
like a 7. I think I'd give Twitch content a 7. I think the only thing missing from the puzzle really is like consistent tournament content. But everything is kind of made up for it by the amount of player streams and like just so many people stream the game now, and I think that's great. So it's a 7.
Yeah, I think I was going to say as well. Twitch content in particular, I think, is doing quite well. I think we have a lot of streamers more than ever. It's like you're like everything that you it's already been said. You know that we just have so many more streamers than we used to. So I'm gonna give it probably a 7.5. Uh, yeah, so 7.5. Walt, what you feeling?
I'm gonna give it an 8 because I think there is room for improvement as kind of events get more robust too, especially people like Aiden and the BTS team who are kind of like figuring out more ways to make online and offline events just kind of like more uh, well produced and like figure out ways to kind of incorporate players and make the Twitch experience better. It's already very good is the thing, and then being able to kind of incorporate the individual player streams I think is the biggest improvement by a huge margin. Like to just be able to go over to Nun's stream and watch him talk with chat while he's in game 5 casually last stock with someone for this like high stakes event. That's amazing to me. So 8 for me.
Nice. Okay. Let's do player education next. So this is ranking like someone wants to learn more about Melee, no matter where that is. Doesn't have to be on YouTube or Twitch. It could be on a Discord. It could be on some forum. How do we think, compared to other esports and compared to Melee previously, that kind of experience is out of 10? Anyone want me to start? Or
Yeah, you go this time.
so I think this one is doing pretty well. Obviously, like I do a lot of educational content or want to do a lot of educational content. I actually think we're in a pretty good spot. I think some games are harder to learn, even more popular games. We have the benefit of time and meta development and stuff to kind of go, hey, like even our pretty good players can teach you a lot about the game just because of fundamentals and like that kind of thing. So I feel like it's pretty good. This is actually a great time. If there's someone in the chat that's like can speak to, hey, how do I feel right now? Like if I want to learn things, can I go on whether it's a YouTube, a Twitch, or whatever and learn, or is it kind of are there big barriers? 'Cause I feel like it's good. I feel like it's like a 7 or something personally, but there's room for improvement for sure.
I think the big missing thing here is probably like some sort of like built-in in-game tutorial that can like guide you about the intricacies of the game, right? As far as like congregation of like content and like tools for you to learn, I think it's like any title and like any sort of piece of information on the internet, it's like not as like centralized as it could be. I don't think this is a Melee centric problem. I think this is like a kind of a hobbyist community problem where if you're looking for like really like intricate and interesting material to learn about that thing, it can often be difficult to find because there's no real hub for it. So I would say like in comparison to other scenes or other like interest groups or hobbyists of any kind, the main thing is missing is like an embedded tutorial of some sort. And so I'd give it like I'd give this like an 8, like a 7. I'll give it a 7. I'll give it a 7 because I think like some of the resources material on YouTube could be like cleaned up and like more like categorized a little better, I guess, and like more comprehensive. But I think for the most part, like there's a ton of information out there. It's pretty easy to like learn about the game if you do take the time to search for it. And we're just missing this sort of like in-game tutorial that would guide a competitive player.
Just question: do you think that not having forums anymore? I know anymore is like they've been gone for a while, but like, do you
Yeah.
think if we had forums, this would be a way higher number? Because I kind of feels like when I first started playing, you'd go into Smash boards and you'd go to like Falco, Fox, whatever, and you'd be like reading some long forum post, and you'd be like, yeah, his up tilt is good. You know, so like, I don't know. Do you think that's a huge loss? I guess that we kind of don't have that sort of platform.
Yeah, for sure. We talked about this on the Scar and Toph show actually. That ended up being like most of our conversation was like forum not having a forum anymore, and like most communities not having a forum means that the your ability to like centralize information and like so it's accessible to any new incoming uh player or person interested in the community. It's like without that, then they're faced with like Twitter and Discord and like all these different things. So like forums like are, you know, have been phased out. They're kind of archaic, but like they did have value in that regard. And I think that's a huge L for us. Also, somebody's saying something in chat about coming from coaching another game professionally. They said this Melee community is a 4. I don't know if I haven't like dug in on this, but like when I look for like advice or like guidance sort of content for like CS:GO, for Valorant, and like I used to for League, I actually really struggle to find stuff like even on YouTube, searching like very general terms. So I feel like I would like to know what games you're talking about.
I kind of agree because I over the last couple of years got back into Overwatch and was learning a lot of Overwatch stuff, and I feel like we do it better than them, and they're like a bigger game in a lot of ways. I think we do it better than the StarCraft scene. I actually do think, like, not even not trying to boost myself or anything because I only have like a small part of it. Like I think we do it well. I think there's a lot of stuff that you can learn, but also we're fairly experienced players. Maybe to someone who's new and can't find these things, and maybe if you can't find them, maybe that is a bigger problem.
I think the catch when it comes to kind of like how we handle education in Melee is that the game is so nuanced and everyone has different perspectives to how they approach the game. So the example I'm thinking of off the top of my head is getting coaching from Rishi versus getting coaching from Laud. And Rishi, I think, tweeted about this a few days ago where he was like, if you want the full experience of what my coaching is like, buy the package from Laud too, and you can see that we disagree on literally everything when it comes to the game. Which is insane, which is awesome to me that people have like different, they value things differently in the game. But it does kind of muddy, I guess, like the flow of information for me. Which knocks down my rating a little bit, not by much, but I think to a point where, yes, the education from like a YouTube content and like accessibility perspective is quite good in my opinion. The means to actually find it, and this goes back to the kind of the forums talk, is a little bit more challenging than I would like it to be. So, I mean, for me, I think that knocks it down a little bit. If I was going to give it a number, I'd say like 6.5 maybe, like not too far down from what you guys had. Again, because I do think it's very good and valuable, but the thing is how you learn the game can vary drastically depending on who you learn it from. And I feel like that's a big thing when it comes to like Melee as a culture. Is it's like you tend to learn from specific resources or like your friends, for instance, and it's like that bleeds into kind of like overall play styles and stuff too, where you have like your really fast paced Fox players that learn from Mango, right? Or your really reserved floaty characters that know how to play position because they learn from another Peach player or something like that. It's like your upbringing can actually matter a lot, and then that kind of impacts how you see education in the game.
I think a big thing too is the existence of all these Twitch streams makes it more accessible for like I remember there was a period of time where I got really bad like RSIs in my hand. Yeah, crazy that a Melee player would have hand problems at one point.
No way.
I had to take a break. but I was still like, I had like the melee brain, and I was like, I just want to get better at this game. And so I was watching like analysis videos, like Mango analysis videos. This was back in like 2015 or something. And at the time, like I was like looking for analysis videos, and there weren't that many. And now if you go onto YouTube and go like Smash analysis, like there are so many streamers that are like, well, I'm gonna do some analysis today, or like even if they don't do analysis, they're doing like gameplay where they talk through every decision as they're going. Like I feel like you could learn so much from Ginger's stream, PPMD's stream. Fiction has been doing a lot of really cool stuff. Drug Fox just exists and is like this
The
fountain
greatest
of
melee
melee
coach of all
knowledge.
time. So
Honestly, that dude is insane. There's so many times where like I'm working on a video now that I've been working on for a while that I actually talked with Drug Fox for about like a year ago, and he was like, he literally said something like, situations like this are easy if you have perfect knowledge, but hard if you don't. He's like, but since I have perfect knowledge of this, he's like, I can just answer this. I was like, wow, it's like, it must be pretty nice.
but since my
So,
brain is wrinkled as fuck, let me tell you
yeah,
how
exactly.
this
Yeah.
is going down.
So that's why I'm giving it like a fairly high score. Is I actually think like if you're a Falco player and you're like, okay, I want to get good, you can just, there's so many people making
Yeah.
content that like that wasn't the case before. Like especially if you weren't just playing the game and you wanted to do some like, big brain analysis, that just didn't exist. So
There's an interesting point that Adam Kara made in the chat, which huge shout outs to him. Really awesome Rivals of Ether channel, actually. But he said, I feel like a game like Melee has harder info to find, but it's often more accurate than big esports games, which are typically like way more clickbaity.
very true.
I think that's actually the barrier I'm working through in Valorant right now is like, so Valorant is probably the first game I've taken like as seriously as Melee, at least to a similar degree since I got into Melee. Like this is probably the hardest I've tried in a game, or like the most I've played something. And I played Breeze last night, which is like a new map, and I didn't do very well. Like I've played Breeze enough times, but I played it in a ranked game for the first time on that map because it just got into the rank queue, and I didn't play very well, and I felt pretty lost. And I tried to look up like Breeze like map info or like Breeze like map guidance, but I just got a bunch of like bullshit clickbait content that was like from when the map came out, because everybody is trying to beat people to the punch on like touring the map and showing you little things, and it's like an okay player telling you like, oh, maybe that would work, but it has nothing to do with actual like hard analysis or like what I'm looking for as a player who's looking to improve. And I feel like this is what League and Counter-Strike suffer from, is like it's more focused on making a video that's clickable for someone just scrolling through YouTube than it is actually helping someone who's working on becoming a good player. And that's what the big games suffer from. And like we haven't gone that direction yet because I think our community is like so hardcore, and like a lot of our tutorial content is based around a new game that doesn't have like new things releasing that you need to like create some like flavor of the month video about. It's like, if I'm going to watch a video about getting around Falco lasers, I actually get a good video about navigating Falco lasers.
No, completely agree. I completely agree. So, yeah, I think we gave that 7, and what? You said 8? No.
I gave
Yeah,
it
yeah.
a 6.5.
6.5. Okay. So, player population. This is like super, super simple one, but just worth pointing out. How is the game doing from a pure numbers perspective? Do we think we're growing? Do we think we're shrinking? Is there a lot of players? Queue times in the game right now, I think, are indicative of there being a lot of players. No one really knows exactly how many people are playing Melee, including Fizzy, by the way. I've asked him, and he's like, the shorter answer is, I don't know. And I'm like, oh. So, yeah, what do we think? Anyone want to start this off? How are we doing for the growth of the game in the numbers department?
Aiden, you go.
I don't think I could explicitly share, but I think I have some more insight into this topic.
Oh.
And I think it's good, and I will leave it at that.
Okay.
I think this is probably the first upswing. We couldn't really gauge the player base before, albeit like we have no way of like knowing the exact number of people that were playing competitive Melee in 2016, which is when things were at the peak, because like people were playing offline in dorm rooms, in like in apartments and things like that, and that's how competition worked, which is cool in a way, right? It's very romantic in a way. But unfortunately, there's no way to collect hard data for that. But we do know that that was like the peak period for interest in the game. And I think this is probably the first period since 2016 where those numbers are where the player base number is like going up. That's my theory right now.
What's the number that you're giving this out of 10 in terms of where our player population is at right now? Is it good, bad?
Reeling in expectation of like what is reasonable, I would give this an 8. You know, of course, because it's like, of course, not as many people are playing Melee as are playing League. Like that's not.
Yeah.
It's just like not possible, right? I would call it not possible, honestly.
Hmm.
But I think like within reason, like if we're thinking about fighting games, I would give this in the history of Melee itself, I would say an 8.
Walt, you want to give your thoughts?
Yeah, okay. I don't want to really like blue pill, red pill you guys or like get super into the deep rabbit hole about this, but the thing that keeps ringing in my mind when, you know, Aiden was giving kind of like it looks really good, especially in Slippy era type beat. Where do you guys stand with this whole like crazy debate about monitors versus CRTs? Because I do think that a big portion of one, getting players interested in the game, and two, again, kind of referencing like the top of that marketing funnel, it starts with accessibility. I think that the marketing is kind of there. It could probably be improved a little bit to get like people who know nothing about fighting games or Smash in general to kind of get into Slippy. But to me, it seems like the biggest barrier to our player population as a rating comes from making the game accessible. And I just can't stop thinking about monitors versus CRTs when it comes to that.
My short version is I'm not, as far as Melee debates go, I feel like I'm not nearly as passionate about this one. I think I lean on the side of CRTs because as a TO, getting CRTs and using CRTs was always considerably more affordable from a TO perspective than using monitors was. And I think for tournaments that do not have a monitor sponsor or want to secure setups without using Gaming Gen, like if you get all your setups through the community, like we did at Dome Park, or like we did at like Gang, and those are tournaments where we had like 60 plus setups, right? That we didn't have like a Gaming Gen step in to do it for us. I think CRTs are just much more affordable and accessible. And I think that is my main reason for leaning on CRTs. And until that changes, like from a TO standpoint, I think I will be in favor of CRTs.
I think my thoughts, and anyone who follows me on Twitter has kind of already seen some of this, but I think like it is totally fine to do both to some degree. So like if we want to have locals with CRTs, maybe I'm wrong with this, and maybe chat can call me out on this, but like, do we really think like someone goes to a local after playing on a bunch of monitors and goes like, what the fuck is this? I'm not playing on it unless it's a monitor.
What are these big monitors with the big backs doing over here?
That's what I'm saying. Like, and so maybe it's the reverse that like, oh, I only play on CRTs. Well, like, okay, I don't know. Hax's nightclub existed and it had a bunch of top players that were playing on it, and it all seemed to be okay. I feel like the switch to monitors is inevitable, but I also think like if you're a guy who wants to run a local or yeah, like a Don't Park on the Grass style like big event, and CRTs are more accessible, go for it. You know, like
Yeah.
I think both are good.
Yeah, I didn't want to derail it too
Why
hard.
not both?
I apologize for that. I do think it's kind of crazy, like when we do think about that. Again, kind of reeling it back to accessibility and how we get more players interested in the game. It is insane to me to think about if events come back and we aren't pivoting to monitors and there are CRTs. There are a lot of players who will come to these events who have never probably seen a CRT in their life. Like that is wild to me to think about.
Yeah, and I think you're right to bring it up. I think in terms of like how do we grow stuff, what's holding us back? I would say that accessibility is an issue. You know, like I was arguing with a guy on Twitter who I just didn't even bother replying to eventually about how like if you're trying to get into the game, like Melee is a bit tricky. You know, you need to have a GameCube controller, you need to have a controller adapter. People say like, oh, we'll use an Xbox or something. Like, eventually you need to switch over. You need like to figure out how Slippy works. And yeah, it's like simple, but it's not like that simple. There's a lot of stuff that can kind of go wrong. People's antivirus software is like blocking the Slippy thing. Like I had a friend try to install it and he was like, yo, like it just doesn't work. And I was like, check your antivirus. Like, so I do think that's a huge barrier. And I think it does hurt the population. That being said, I think our player population is pretty good. I'd probably give it a 7.5 as well. I think it's honestly like probably I'm trying to think like it could be like a at least 1 million or 2 million players would be my guess, which some people might think is big, but I've done some research to acquire these numbers. So at least, but yeah, so I think it's big. Um, Maybe 2 million seems maybe a bit high, but 1 million I'm pretty comfortable in saying it could be 1 million.
Yeah, and there's
I think
also a
you're
ton of people that
smoking.
play casually.
You're smoking a little. If you think it's 2 million, I'll say that the 2 million, 2 million is pretty crazy.
It basically I base that on like how quick of a connection the Slippy games are. Even though it's worth mentioning that comparing like an Overwatch queue to a Slippy queue is not the same because it's 1v1 versus like 6v6. But that's really fast. If you look at like the followers of certain channels and stuff, they'll have a ton of YouTube followers or Twitch followers. Of like tutorial content and that kind of stuff. So I think 1 million is reasonable. 2 million seems, yeah, you're right, a little too high. It's easy to say 1 to 2 and then be like, no, probably not 2.
Dude, I don't even know if 2 million people play Counter-Strike a month.
There have to
know.
be Steam stats for that though, right?
I would
There
be
are.
shocked if it was not higher than that. Because like
Small tangent. If you want a shocker, go look at the NA server stats for Counter-Strike. It is a sad sight, dude.
See that.
It is a sad sight, dude.
I don't even play Counter-Strike and I don't
Anyway.
want to see it. It's like...
Is it just everyone playing Valorant then? Is that the problem? Like
I think NA is just super Valorant heavy right now. It's the difference between NA and EU for Counter-Strike, like by the numbers, is absolutely insane. It is they're dude, they're like they on the concurrent stat checker it has, it like checks once a day. There's like 9,000 on NA West and then like 190,000 on EU North alone. It's crazy.
yeah, that's insane.
Great.
Like
love that.
I just think because like if you compare it, like I know the numbers for certain Blizzard games, like Hearthstone is something like 29 million players, and like I think to think that Melee, which has like way better esports numbers than Hearthstone, not to say that that's like a good comparison because some games are not great esports games, but like you know Overwatch also has like several tens of millions of players. I think Melee's got like 1 million feels like a conservative estimate when you think about the viewership of certain tournaments and the overlap. It just depends on how you define a player. Like someone who has Slippy installed would be.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think you can't just make that active player who are competing in events because that number gets chopped down quite a bit. But if you consider like you know the people that just play the game or like consider themselves like semi-pros, for instance, then yeah, I think there's a lot that are probably going unaccounted for too.
So, Walt, what's your number?
I'm gonna give it just a solid 7. I think that we're doing pretty well. I don't think we're in any danger of dying anytime soon. And you know, hearing Aiden's positive outlook on things that he can't share too much more on gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, last thing before we get to the esports section, which I do want to spend some time on. So maybe we go through kind of quick on the YouTube content, although this is sort of Walt and I's specialty, I guess, to some degree. But the state of YouTube content, Melee-related YouTube content in 2021, what do we think? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it amazing? Is it shit?
I got a lot.
Let me know.
I got someone else go first.
I think it's arguably better than it's ever been. I'll give it that.
Yeah.
It's I think like we always used to really struggle with YouTube content, and now thanks to YouTube, among other people, I think it's in a much better spot. And I would give this a I would give it a s- I would give it a 6. I would give it like a 6. Actually, no. I forgot about the highlights channel, so like I'd give it a 7. Give it a 7.
Okay. Well, are you ready to talk yet, or do you want to
I
give
might
me?
need a minute.
Okay.
I got some stuff on
So
this.
I think this is an area where I also feel like I have a high standard and like I'm more willing to be critical because it's an area I like I'm more actively participating in. I think there's huge gaps, and then some places are doing well. So I think where we've excelled more recently, uh, Toph called it the like Ludwig YouTube meta, which is like these daily uploads of streamers like Hugs, Toph, all the Golden Guardian stuff coming out recently. I think in that category we're doing well of like melee or melee adjacent streamers that are releasing frequent YouTube content. I think with Walt, we have these long form documentaries, short form documentaries that are really, really interesting. And I think, with SSBM tutorials coming back, we have some more tutorial content. If my health gets back to where it was, I do also want to be pushing that space as well. Where I think we're not doing as well is they're still like pocketed. So for example, like with like Walt is kind of the only guy doing documentary type stuff that I think is like at a high level. And I think the documentary, as we all know, is a thing that brought a lot of people in. I think Walt's videos bring a lot of stuff in. A lot of people in. I think Awesome Sauce also, of course, his content bringing a lot of people in. But there's like these spaces that don't feel like
And
they're
add melee
filled.
stats also to that list.
Yes,
Just
yes.
yeah.
And it's the thing. I think the content is good, for sure. I just feel like, yeah, the melee stats docs, yeah, are really good. Yeah, you
Hmm.
you definitely gotta shut them out. But it just feels like it's like it could be so much better. And I feel like I still want to give it a 7, but I'm imagining the 10, and the 10 is possible. It just the challenge is the reason why there's the Ludwig YouTube meta is because YouTube rewards daily uploads and it does not reward the videos that take longer to make. And so that is part of the
Yeah.
problem is that certain content will always be pushed out by YouTube because YouTube doesn't pay that content well and it doesn't reward the content well algorithmically.
Yeah. um okay. So, what was your final number for that? 7?
I think 7. Aiden, did you give a number? Was it 6.5?
I said 7.
7? Okay.
Okay. So I think that the first thing that's really stuck with me through this entire bit was Aiden saying it's better than it's ever been before, and I do agree with that. But
Yeah.
I think that there have been major strides and improvements overall in YouTube as a platform. Uh, this does not consider any other form of visual media platform because we are fucking dropping the ball in every other aspect when it comes to uh, like forms of social
TikTok,
media
yeah.
like TikTok, YouTube, or not YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, what have you, whatever the Zoomers are using nowadays. Um, with that said, though, I mean, like, I think that it's improved a lot, but there is a lot more room for improvement. And like, don't get me wrong, that's not like a jab at anyone who's making melee content right now. Like, I think myself included, my videos could be much more robust than what they are. There could be much more improvement in terms of the sphere of marketing, figuring out how to target certain audiences and retain those audiences so that they actually come in and become entrenched in the game, and that lends itself to the player population rating as well. Um, the people that I think of that come to mind right now, and this is just completely from the hip, is like myself, Radar, Melee Stats, Alston Melee, um, people who do like I can't even think of a lot of people who just do like content for content, like and the players of course are content creators, but I have like a weird opinion when it comes to stream highlights. I think that they're kind of in a weird place on YouTube right now, but I don't really want to dive into that rabbit hole right now. And then like I talk about Awesome Sauce a lot when we have discussions on this stuff, because I think he's the person that's probably doing it far and away the best out of everyone. But the reason that his content is so successful is because it is very accessible to people who care about Melee very deeply and want to know about more of its intricacies. And it's also accessible to people who don't know jack shit about Melee, but are still like, oh, okay, video game's kind of cool, I guess. Pocketed is a good word that you used, Radar. I think that it's very like segmented right now. People are doing things that are very successful. Wisely added Junebug is another really good one as well, I think. Good friend as well. But it's very like people do their own things and they have like their own niche. And I think since 5 Days of Melee specifically, like we've really started to make better strides at collaboration, which I think is a huge hole in how YouTube content is stagnating and staying pocketed. Because I mean, like in general, collaboration is just a huge way to actually gain followings on YouTube as a whole. It's something that we're just severely not doing. I know, Radar, you recently did an episode with Alston Melee, which was actually quite good. But in terms of kind of like big collaboration efforts like that, there really aren't a lot. And then you look to the channels that just post VODs, like, you know, the BTS Smash that posts events after SCL. They post all the VODs as they happen. VG Bootcamp, you know, posts literally hundreds of videos a day, because they'll post all the VODs from like Xanadu that you and I commentate, Radar, plus the Ultimate event the day before, plus whatever other tournaments they're running. It makes like a weird saturation as well, where it becomes really hard to parse information when you go onto the site, because it's like, okay, like there's really cool pieces of long form, short form content, educational content, an analytical content, what have you, that exist on this platform, but I have to dig through thousands of VODs now to find it, because they're just like, if I just search by Melee, I will never ever be able to find it, because our SEO isn't super great right now either.
Sure.
With all that being said, and going on as long of a tangent as that was, I think the content that we do have is good. I think that there are very big improvements that could be made from everybody, and I think that all the people who do make content right now are aware that there are holes and that there can be improvements made. For a number, I'm gonna give it a 6, because I don't think it's perfect by any means, but I do think that it is on its way.
I think I'm also gonna give it a 6. I think 7's a bit too high for me. I think I'm, you know, my own worst critic, so I think there's a lot of stuff that I just have so many ideas, and there's things that I'm just like, no one is doing any of that. Like not even like because I think my idea is original. I just think, man, we don't have, like, I did an interview with Greg Turbo the other day, and it's like, is this only controller like based content we have? Really, I feel like there just isn't much stuff about like people like, you know, the Goom Wave and Frame One and all this stuff. But in the interest of time, let us move along to the final tab. Walt, if you don't mind refreshing this, I'm just going to add it right now. I'm going to do 6.5 for YouTube content. This is the final score for the category. So we got, I just refreshed as you did it, but oh well, it says YouTube content 6.5 on the tab. There it is fixed. Yeah, so events is 4, player education is 7, player population is 7.5, YouTube content is 6.5, and Twitch content is 7.5. So our last category is esports. We have hype and narratives, which is just like, you know, the kind of 5 gods is the perfect example of a narrative, of a kind of hype. Oh my God, how exciting and interesting are our tournaments? How exciting and interesting is the competition? That's where we'll score that. Commentary, pretty obvious. Is our commentary good? Is it bad? I know Aiden talked a lot about Slime's commentary on Twitter the other day. You know, we could definitely get into that. Production quality, again, this is, I feel like, where Aiden has a lot to offer, actually, just in this whole category. Production quality, also pretty obvious. How good are the events, the tournaments, in terms of like looking pro and high quality and like everything about the production. Investment potential is what's it called? Would a other company or game or team like want to get into Melee? I feel like it's really cool that Golden Guardians has been involved. But yeah, how are we doing? Like when someone's like, should I invest in this game Melee? You know, they're a boomer. How good are we at that sort of thing? And then the final one, path to pro, is you are a person who wants to get better. What kind of infrastructure do we have right now that takes you from like total amateur player to, you know, kind of middle of the pack, etc.? Like, you know, do we have semi-pro players? Do we have that kind of stuff? Spoiler alert, it's probably not going to be that high for that one, but start with hype and narratives, I think. How we doing in this regard?
I think we're doing great. This one might be the highest score in the whole thing.
Yeah.
I think this
Really?
might actually be, you know what's crazy? I think this might actually be a 10 right now, which is crazy to say. But I think that the storylines that are developing, particularly from this like transition from online into LAN, if you are paying attention to the game right now, I think it is one of the most exciting periods to be a fan, probably since
2015.
2015.
Yes.
Like I just think like the way the game is shaping up right now is so interesting. Maybe, yeah, that's a good point. Somebody in chat mentioned that 9 because there's no rank. I think like there's a lack of a narrative for like the lower level players to some degree because they're what they're fighting for is a little like more ethereal. But yeah, so I'll say 9.5. I think this is just like when I think about Melee right now, this is truly the most excited I feel about it in such a long time. And I think it really comes down to this like incredible rivalry we have between Mango and Zane at the top, where we sort of have a big two. We have a small subset of players that are like capable of challenging them. We have Leffen waiting in the wings, who seems able to like challenge these two players, but we're not sure about it. We have a Yoshi player who's been isolated in Asia for over a year, and we don't know how he's gonna fare when he comes back. We have
makes it sound
one
like
of the
he's
best,
imprisoned. It's like,
one of the best mid-tier players of all time has been fucking tanking online, but he's gonna come back when offline is back in Axe, and he's also never lost to Zane ever.
yeah.
He's never lost to the number one player. The SFAT, who's the picture of consistency. We have an incredible field of international players that have all been working really hard and becoming way better at the game. We have an incredibly dense pack of skill of people who are capable of fighting for this top 20 to 50 range. Like, it is so dense, especially when you throw in the people who aren't competing online but are planning on coming back. It's just, oh my God. I think like when you think about all these things converging in this offline environment as we like as the tension sort of builds from these like larger online events, it is so incredible right now. And the level of play is so high and so exciting. It's in a world where we thought like the game was going to become campier and slower and more optimized, or maybe 5 years ago we thought it was all going to be Fox Dittos. None of those things have come true. None of those things. There are more Falcons. The Marth is the number one. The Puff can still beat anybody in my head. Like, HBox is like capable of coming back and like beating all these people, especially offline. It's just like, it's like this wonderful whirlwind where I think like it's the perfect world where like the problem with the old scene was that nobody could beat the top group of people, but we had this wonderful narrative between them and how good they were. But now it's sort of like there's these two people that have this like exciting, wonderful rivalry between them, with this like field of people who are like chasing them down and catching them up and are driven. And all these people who got in during the dock era, like when we consider the amount of time or the amount of years that it takes to reach the top level of Melee, all the dock kids have caught up. All the dock kids have had enough time. So there's this incredibly large field of people who are capable of being the next Shroomed, for example, that sort of like fill in the gaps. And then also, but the Shrooms are still around. So it's this weird, crazy mix of talent and competition right now. I know that is like very disorganized, but it makes me so excited. So 9.5.
Yeah, I think this is going to be high ranked also. It's funny because the other week we had, the Golden Guardians episode for the Mixup, and we heard from Zane firsthand kind of what his thoughts were on the quote unquote narrative of Melee right now. And he said, essentially kind of echoing what you just said, Aiden, where he enjoys the fact that it's kind of like a big two right now. It's Mango Zane, and it's like who can challenge these two, as opposed to our Five Gods narrative, where it was, okay, these guys are never really going to lose, but eventually when they do, that'll be really exciting. Versus what we have now is really kind of like anything can happen almost. Like it feels like a lot of people are knocking on the door, which is what makes it really interesting. I do want to point back to kind of the YouTube content that we had mentioned earlier, because I think that hype and narratives is something that kind of actively lowers that YouTube score for me. Because there aren't really good way, like the narrative is fucking insane right now when you think about it. If you're a Melee player, though, is the caveat, and if you're not a Melee player, how do you know about it? And that's really the thing when it comes to making things interesting for a newbie, or making things interesting to a player who doesn't know a lot about Melee, where we might not be all the way there when it comes to that.
There was a pretty eye-opening thread about this on Twitter, like just to shortly break off from that, where Toph was interacting with some people. I think it was like Monte Cristo and some other people from like other esports. Basically, they were saying that like Melee has like fallen off or disappeared in their eyes. And Toph was like, really? Because like the scene is in this wonderful spot where we probably have more players than we have in like ages, right? But it's this like issue of like outside perception versus what it's like to be embedded and be a player in the community. And like us making sure that we have like the tournaments and the content to like reach those people who just watch Melee. Because I think the player to like spectator ratio for our game is a lot different for others. Where like I think a lot of people tune in to watch Big House that do not play the game at all.
Sure. Yeah, I think it gets weird where like, sorry to cut you off, Radar. It's kind of like if
go ahead.
If we were to rank, like if a Melee player were to rate our narratives, it would be like a 9. Like I'm gonna give this a 9 for me. But if a non-Melee player were to rate it, they probably would give it a pretty low score, because that information isn't being conveyed, I guess, like easily and accessibly. It's like a relationship. Communication's pretty goddamn important when it comes to those sort of things. So it's like getting that information across so that the Monte Cristos and like those other esports folks of the world actually understand that, like, yes, Melee is alive and well. And there's actually a lot of really fucking cool things that are happening with it. That's really important. The last thing I wanted to add when it comes to narratives, and then I'll pass it off to you, Radar, is the idea, and you kind of loosely touched on this, Aiden, of like, our Leffins and our Amsas waiting in the wings. The idea of just moving back to in-person events, period, is something that is insanely hype for people, whether you're a fan of Melee or not. Like, just being able to interact with other human beings in a physical setting is something that I think contributes to the overall narrative of this esport incredibly, where it's just kind of like, we're going to have like the viewership boost and, the amount of people that are excited about Summit 11, for instance. It's like first tournament back from COVID. That's going to be insane, just thinking about all that. But yeah, for me, I think it's a 9. I think it's very, very good. But there also is the kind of contrarian view of, if you're not a Melee player, that number may be way lower, and that's something that I feel like we can work on as a community.
Yeah. Do you sorry, just to touch on like one more thing that ties into what you said. The interesting thing about this being a big two and people being able to challenge them or not is we sort of had a big two era before, and it was Armada and Hungrybox. But the problem with that era was when they play, for whatever reason, and I'm not saying this is necessarily fair, but when we got to a point in time where they would get to winners finals or they would get to grand finals and people would check out. It is not interesting. But every time it is Zane Mango, people are happy and excited to see it. It's like, if they get upset, then it's extremely interesting because someone has beaten them to get there. And then if they play each other, it's some of the best Melee you've ever seen. So it's this like beautiful dynamic of like, whichever way it plays out, whichever way, because of that like structure that the narrative is built around, it's like it can turn out this way or it can turn out that way, and it's extremely exciting both ways, and that's why it's really cool.
So I'm going to be the kind of contrarian person here and move a bit away from the 9s, the 9.5s. I might give this like a 6. So I actually
Oh
think
God.
yeah.
Who are you?
So hear me out.
Fake fan.
guys.
Fake fan.
So as a melee player, right? You know, I feel like I see the side that you guys are kind of hinting at, this outside player. So right now, I think in terms of like how excited am I for Summit coming? How I'm excited, like I feel like I would pay a lot of money just to see Leffen play any of these guys. Like I'm so glad that he is going to be there. I'm so glad that Amstel's going to be there. So do not get me wrong. I think there's a lot of hype. I think where we're like, and I actually think the hype, if this was just hype, I think there's a lot of like, you know, in terms of raw hype that's just there from the matches, it's high. How we're communicating that hype, which is the narrative side, I think is really struggling. I feel like there's a couple problems that just come to mind. The first one is I agree that the Zane Mango storyline is interesting. I think one problem, and maybe this is even I am wrong, that we're having, I think is a feeling like those two are really, really, really relevant. And especially on Zane's side, most people can't take down Zane. I think one of the things that was nice about the whole like Five Gods era is you could be critical of the fact that like, oh, these are the only 5 relevant players, which wasn't entirely true, but like, you know, you can kind of see it mostly true. Whereas now it feels like who can really beat Zane besides like Mango, S2J? Like it feels like there's a tier below that he's kind of just like not touchable on. And I think that was also true with the Armada HBox era. And I think the era suffered a bit from that. So that's one side. But the biggest thing I think that is the problem is just somehow we haven't done a great job of like creating these storylines that are people are really interested in. And I think if we're tying back to the whole YouTube content thing, I think like when a newer player or a player that maybe we all know but like don't have like this kind of like imaginary persona around them, it's not like as hyped. Like I had some friends who were watching SCL with me who hadn't watched recently, and they were like, oh, a Plup's coming on, okay, that's cool. Like, oh, you know, Wizrobe, yeah, that'll be good. And then they'd see someone like say Gatsu and they'd be like, so like kind of, is he gonna do well? Like, do you know what I mean? Like it's like there somehow isn't a storyline for Gatsu in the same way, even though I think of Gatsu as a player who was like middle of the pack for so long and that kind of like 50, 60, top 100 rank. And then now all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, is Gatsu like top 10? Like this is crazy. And so, I don't want to go too rambly here, but like, it feels like a lot of these players are missing this like storylines, narratives, storyline kind of like persona, wording this poorly. And the people like the kind of HBoxes, the Plups, they still have that. And so how do we kind of give a narrative to those other players?
It starts with
I see what you're
accessibility
saying.
is the thing.
I think it's time. I think it's really just time. I don't even know if it's like accessibility, right? The only reason that your friends are like oh Plup, oh HBox, it's just because like those people were the people hitting top 8s or upsetting top players, and then in VODs and highly viewed tournaments for the past 5 years. It's like they would feel that way about Gatsu if he'd been getting top 8 for the last 5 years too. It's the same reason why everybody recognizes like West Balls, even though he's like kind of had a shitty couple past 2 years, you know? And it's like, I think it's just a matter of time. And also hurts us is like, we just don't have the viewership that we did in the sort of 2015 to 2017 bubble. So when, even as time passes, it's less people learning about these new players on their come up, right? And I think that is just the main thing. And like whether or not like that plays into accessibility, you know, to some degree, we can make up for it by like improving some things. But I think we also need to realize that the wave we rode in those couple years was an extraordinary sort of stroke of luck and circumstance where all these things came together to create this massive wave of people at the same time that will be very difficult to replicate no matter how much work we put in. And that's the reason that all those players are so recognizable, is we existed in a bubble of interest for Melee that may be never replicated again.
Yeah, because it does seem like when you say that, like part of me also feels like, yeah, but it's not just that they were like relevant and good. It's that they were also like the few players that could start to be like God slayers. Like even if that narrative kind of died in some people's eyes, I feel like the reason why, like the thing that I found watching it with them was when they would watch like a plup or something, they were like, oh, this guy can win the whole thing. And I feel like I didn't disagree with them that someone like Gatsu, I was like, no, I don't think he can win the whole thing. Even if like say Plup, for example, maybe doesn't have that good of a shot against Zayn either. I don't know. But like there's this feeling for me of watching some of these guys, it's like because I haven't seen them hit that number one, it's unclear whether they can actually do it. And the ones
Isn't
who
that
have,
just like haven't you answered that for yourself though? It's literally because Gatsu hasn't done it. It's like
Yeah,
yeah, that's what I mean. These guys haven't.
Gatsu has not. I don't even know if it's like an issue of like narrative or like marketing that. You could like bring that point up if like Gatsu had won a major and like and then your friends were still saying that, because I think that would be more valid, right? It's like Gatsu has won a major in the span of the last 2 years. Your friends who haven't paid attention or watched very much don't know that. And that's kind of a slight on like either our work and our ability to advertise our community or just an ebb and flow of like the people interested in the game. And like I would understand that. But the perspective of like it's the same reason we probably saw at SFAT and Winners Finals and we're like
okay, oh my god, I was literally about to say that because I feel like that's kind of like people don't know.
Yeah.
Like as another example, people don't know about him, and I literally said I had my pre-show stream for week 4, and I said on stream SFAT will make it to Winners Finals or to Winners Side Finals and probably get like 3rd, and my chat was like. And I had like Edwin Budding on too, and he was just like, that is a dream bracket. And I was like, yes, it's a dream bracket, but it's very, very possible. But the only reason I would even make that bet is 1, because I love Zach, but 2, because I know a lot about these narratives. And I feel like the argument there is kind of like your average Melee watcher probably would never, ever, ever think SFAT is going to get to Winners Finals, for week 4.
Yeah. We were talking about that on the podcast last night. The ratio, him versus Plup, the ratio of like bet points in Twitch chat was like 4-1 for Plup.
I wish I was home during that set. I would have cashed in, dude. Holy shit.
I was looking at the number and I was like, do any of you know fucking anything? Like, dude, he's won. He beat Zach. He has won like the last 6 sets, hasn't he? Like, that's what I was thinking to myself.
He's
it's like, this
consistent.
is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, no, I agree. I guess the one thing maybe I would push back on is like, I figured out a good way to try to describe what I'm saying. If you have your friend on the couch or whatever, and you're trying to like pitch a player's narrative, I feel like that's hard to do for some people. So it's not just, I think that like Gatsu hasn't won this, because like you could say, oh, Leffen hasn't done this, but the narrative was like he's the God's
Leffen hasn't
player.
won a North American tournament in over a year.
That's the thing, like, but you back when Leffen was kind of the God Slayer mode, and 2015 he was just taking names. I feel like the thing you could say was like, yo, man, like this guy, he's done this and that, and it felt like very easy to sort of to just kind of tie it together. And I feel like that's missing a bit. And I think some of it is just on commentary and on like it's the responsibility of the community to actually try to figure out what these narratives are, because I don't think it's like that they don't exist. I think it's
kind of also because it's online too, though. Like I remember we talked about this in an episode at one point, Radar. I think it was with Melee Stats, where we were saying like because of the ability to just kind of like enter a tournament whenever you want if you are a competitive player, like as a fan or someone who follows the narratives, like for me even, I miss a lot of stuff. So it's like someone like a Gatsu for me is kind of like, okay, wow, like I knew Gatsu was good, but where did he come from, because like I really hadn't seen much of him because I don't keep up with a ton of these events that just kind of go on sporadically throughout different months. I think if this were to be kind of like a report card that we give pre-COVID, this number would perhaps your number would be way higher. For instance, because I know watching like Summit 9, for instance, I was able to explain to like my girlfriend at the time, oh, this is Axe. Everyone likes Axe. Or Smash Summit 8, excuse me, but everyone likes Axe. He plays Pikachu. No one else really plays Pikachu as good as him, and he has a chance to win this whole thing, and he's super nice. And then like immediately people are like, okay, yeah, like that's cool. I want Axe to win now. Knowing nothing about Melee.
You know what it is? This is actually a really good transition, and it just goes straight into commentary. And it's the
Oh
fact that
yes, let's
most of
go.
our established and top level commentators do not pay enough attention to the game to be able to explain the narratives of
Sure.
these new age players. The reality is that Scar is checked out and he's a dad and he's not paying attention to net play results. And when somebody new comes up on the screen, he has no way to articulate who they are to anybody. Toph is admittedly getting better at this, but I think Toph had an era where he wasn't really paying attention to anything because he had other stuff, right? He was like working a full-time job, and I think naturally, like you can only pay super close attention for so long if you aren't doing this stuff full time. And similarly, I think like a lot of top level commentators just aren't checked in to this stuff, right? They're not paying attention to this stuff super actively. And therefore, very understandably, they are not able to articulate the narrative of these upcoming players. They're also hurt by the fact that I think a lot of these people, even 5 years ago, weren't paying attention to who the upcomers were in those eras, right?
Sure.
They weren't really paying attention past the established field of people who are like fighting for top 50. So when somebody like Ben shows up, who's been getting better for a long time and has played the game, it's like, oh, he's so new. It's like Ben has played for 6 years. And if you're like I'm not saying everybody needs to be this person, but if you're like a hardcore fan that's like paid attention to results, then you know Ben is
Yeah.
someone who's been decent for like a few years, right? And it's not, it's same thing with Kadoran, right? He's a highlighted a little more because he was in SoCal, but I think Kadoran's a really good example where like he's been coming up in SoCal for a long time, and now he's kind of like reaping what he sowed in that like he's practiced really, really hard and he's finally reached that top level. It's like these aren't brand new people, and I think our top level commentators were not there to pay attention and therefore like articulate in this new era what those narratives are.
Hey, I
It's a
will
great
say there's a pair of really good and handsome commentators that cast some Xanadu's every other week, and
Yeah, yes.
we kind of do some stuff together. I'm just
So,
saying. But
and I could ask you all because the thing is like I think Aiden is 100% correct,
Yeah.
and I think add on to that, it's building narratives is very difficult. So like both, I'm not gonna speak for Walt. I'm gonna speak for myself. Like I feel like obviously both him and I have been doing a lot of commentary. I still have a lot of stuff that I want to improve on. I'm not like the best commentator in the world yet. I'm trying to be, I said yet there, but trying to be better at it. But the thing that I think I've noticed, I've been trying to work on these narratives since we've been doing this kind of Xanadu series really regularly. And it is really hard. Even if you are watching the tournament every week or every other week and you are like checked into these players and you're trying to kind of find these threads, like it is very difficult. So I think, it is not a skill that everyone has.
I actually have a really big tip for this because I actually think this is incredibly easy, but I realize that it's because of like the way I think like I approach the idea of narratives or like how I've like met people, and I wish I focused more on commentary or like wish I could focus more on commentary to like do this better because I think it's like the thing that I am the best at in terms of like a commentary perspective. And you do not developing narratives from like just looking at people and their bracket runs and their performances is actually like surprisingly hard, especially if they're like a middle of the pack player. The best thing you can do is meet up with these people physically and hang out with
Yep.
them for like a day or hang out with them for a weekend.
Right.
Like as soon as you do that, creating the narrative is actually incredibly easy because you learn who they are in their local region, like what made them pick up Melee, what makes them want to compete. Like one of the coolest narratives to me personally has been Sunsei because like I met him a long time ago and I know that he was like an amateur tennis player who like got really good at tennis, applied a bunch of those concepts to learning Melee, managed to climb really, really quickly because of that in like a very short period, had these like little mini rivalries in Calgary with like Krizki and Quaff, and then that work ethic like translated into these like really quick results. Then he moved to Ontario, then he moved back to Alberta, and like I know all that about Sunsei just because he's like my friend and I've hung out with him. And you can do this with every single Melee player in the scene.
Yeah.
Literally every single one. And I think I've had the privilege of like meeting a lot more people than most, like just because I've happened to be able to attend like a lot of events. But I think that's the way you approach narratives is like you just spend time with these people and they kind of like give you the narrative for you. And then you just have to like share those facts about that person and like build it out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like it's kind of funny because you started the commentary thread by mentioning, kind of like Scar and Toph. I think the two like perennial commentators. If we had like a face to some of the voices of Melee, it would probably be those two.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I actually had a pretty lengthy conversation in my Discord like a week or a few days ago, specifically about them, because like to me, if we were to consider like those two as general esports casters, which they are, I would say, I would argue that like Toph at the time of them kind of being like the big two before Scar like became his family man and everything like that. Toph was probably more of a play-by-play caster or like an analytical side caster, whereas I think
Yeah.
Scar is color through and through. Um, and that's where like color commentary is kind of where you build narratives and kind of understand more about what motivates the players and why this tournament is important and everything you just said about, you know, Sunsei, for instance. What's interesting about Melee as a game is that there are not hard and fast roles in commentary because the game is too fast to do that. So you can't just be like, I mean, you can. Like, I think Scar is a very good example of someone who I consider probably like an 80% color caster who also does play by play.
Yeah.
And then when he was paired with Toph probably large majority play by play analysis caster who has obviously has knowledge of the narratives as well, but kind of leaves that job to Scar to handle it. That's where it gets interesting in Melee as an esport because those roles shift constantly. Like I think for Radar and myself, the two of us, given our branding and how we handle YouTube content, we both kind of fall into more play-by-play analytical type things, but we can play off of each other well in that sense because we know what the other person wants to talk about, and then we can pull narratives and be color when it's necessary. And that's why commentary is fun for me personally. The other thing that I think is interesting when it comes to building narratives through commentary or just general having more information, especially in the pandemic era, is the fact that we get all of this information about players. Like, you know, we don't know about their personal life. Obviously, I think what you said is very valid, like just learning about the person through virtue of being with them. But we can kind of get access to any piece of information we want, especially if you are more on the technical, analytical, kind of studied side of the game, where it's like I can just pull up, you know, any piece of information I want on my computer right now because when I commentate, I'm sitting in my room with my 3 monitors and I can just throw up like
kind of
a forum, read it right off the forum and look like I'm really fucking smart the whole time. Or like pull up an old script that I had from a video where I talked about port priority and why that matters or something like that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And that's something that we maybe don't get as much access to, especially for something more like a couchcaster situation like what you guys have going on for SCL, where it's like, yeah, they have information, I'm sure, where they can kind of pull it up or people at production are giving it to them. Go ahead.
This ties into like why I complimented Anthony and like I don't want to like lack credit for other people who prepare, but actually, so like just in the context of SCL, there are 2 people who like prepared a lot. And it was Matt.Zeb during the first season. He actually prepared an extraordinary amount. He had like a full like notebook of things he wanted to cover and like stats he wanted to say based off of the matchups and stuff. Shout outs to Matt, who takes pretty much everything he ever does like super seriously and wants to do it well. I think Matt's just like a very, very important in the Melee scene, even though he's like kind of removed from it now. And then Anthony, who admittedly, like most of these top casters, was also checked out from the scene in a lot of ways. And he took the fact that he was doing SCL very seriously, and then before like every week, like reached out to some players, asked them some questions, gathered some data, and made sure he had little bits of things to touch on the following day, like for certain matchups and stuff. And that little bit of preparation like went a long way because he had like little things to bring up over the course of the day that I think are a nice like thing to kind of like complement whatever is going on the screen or to bring context to whatever that match is. Most casters don't do that. Most casters don't prepare like that. And I think like if I'm gonna give this a number, by the way, I'm gonna give it a low number. I think this is a 4, and I think it primarily has to do with my context I have now been given after working with talent from other esports. with the context that Melee is a very unique game and how you have to cast it and like how fast it is, I think that is a problem that makes it particularly difficult to cast. I'd say it's a 4 because the amount of like skill and like seriousness that is absent in Melee commentary is insane, and in Smash commentary in general. Although I think Ultimate actually has some astonishingly good casters on their side. And probably I think the Ultimate scene is actually a better bet in terms of casting than Melee is. And that's why Anthony stands out to me is because he understands all the things that go into commentary from his years of like producing. He knows what it takes to be a good Dota caster, a good Counter-Strike caster, and evaluates that and then applies it to the way he works. And we have so little of the experience that people do from those games. And our best casters like lack a lot of those skills. So I would give this a low number. I would give this a 4.
Was he a Dota caster before?
Anthony?
Yeah.
No, he's like tried Dota casting for fun, but not in like a serious environment.
I was gonna say, because I like loosely watch Dota, but
yeah, he's a producer on shows because we do like Dota Summit, Counter-Strike Summit, like all these events, right? And he's the one like looking at the end product for all those events and evaluating it and taking it in. And like we work pretty closely with like a lot of like CS:GO and like Dota talent or like Fortnite talent. And you get a feel for like, oh, these are the standards in these industries and games, and this is how far from the mountaintop that we are as Smash. It's like one of our biggest weaknesses, actually. And I think I'm only giving it a 4 because there's sort of like these like diamonds that we have that sort of elevate the rest of the crowd. Yeah, that's like my perspective.
What gets tough to that point is that I think this is kind of like a common trope that people in the Melee scene tend to fall into, where it's like they feel like, and this is like also true in some ways, but like you can't be good at everything. And I don't mean this like you can't be good at everything in just the realm of commentary. I think like a lot of people that get into commentary are also just entrenched in the game in many other ways. So like they want to be the best competitor, and they want to be the best content creator, and they want to be a streamer, and they want to do all of these other things. But it's kind of like at that point, maybe you're spreading yourself too thin, and it becomes really hard to kind of like zero in and focus on certain aspects of the production side, which is maybe where our commentary is struggling a little bit.
Yeah. Specific shout out to Brandon, by the way, who I actually think is surprisingly good at like what he stands out as someone who's done it for so long. He's just has so many like little contacts in the scene and is still like so grassroots that his like connections and the way he like plays TOs, streams. Brandon has so many like little connections with so many like smaller members of the scene that he knows so many players. And like I think he's kind of the exception amongst this like old guard of commentators who have kind of like checked out, where like Brandon is still like pretty wired in to like how the scene works, and he's much better at like giving you the background on like lower level players and contextualizing narratives than a lot of other people are who have done it as long as he has, or like a similar amount.
So are there like specific things, like if you were to say kind of broadly speaking to the commentators of the world of Melee, that you feel like are missing right now that you would like to see filled? Because
tell us what we suck at, Aiden.
Honestly, like I think
so quality of life stuff, really basic shit, right? This is where Slime does well, and other people do like these things too. It's like ultimately people have to be good enough at these things, but showing up on time is a great one. Just show the fuck up on time, dude. You know what? DDK the night before. DDK is a CS:GO caster. He texted me the night before our first show because he forgot his call time and he couldn't find it. He asked me. It's like 10 p.m. by the way. He's like, "What's my call time tomorrow?" And I'm like, "Dude, it's 4 a.m." And DDK showed up. And DDK knows what it takes to like do his job and like do it well, right? And it's like, even though it's like a 4 a.m. call time is like ridiculous. It's like, it's such a pain in the ass, especially with the amount of sleep he got and how far he was from the studio. Getting people to show up at like 9:30 or 10 at some of the Smash events can be difficult with some of the people that we work with. And that's come up like a few times over the years. Throws. Smash commentators are awful at throws. When an ad break is coming up, they don't know how to like the ebb and flow of a throw so that the technical director knows to cut away from the screen. Some of our best and most experienced commentators are awful at this very, very basic commentary skill.
That makes me happy. I
Sponsor
think I'm
card
pretty
reads
good
and
at that.
obligations. Almost everybody is terrible at these. There's a very small subset that I actually trust. When I tell them what the sponsor obligation is and tell them to read it, I think there are 3 people that I am utterly confident they are going to do it right in the Melee scene. And I don't want to throw out names, but and then those are like the kind of quality of life baseline expectations for any other game that you need to be able to do. Admittedly, at smaller tournaments and even some major Smash tournaments, these things haven't been very important or applicable over the years, but they're becoming more important at all the major tournaments as we learn how to like properly monetize our tournaments and our scene. So I think those are really important qualities. The thing that Anthony does best that I think a lot of other people are bad at is he balances humor with articulation of the average player's perspective. So he's able to break down situations that he actually understands like surprisingly intimately and well from like a technical standpoint, and then he is able to articulate the feelings of like what that situation is like in a way that the average viewer accepts. My biggest problem with top players critiquing commentary all the time is because they critique it as their perspective as a top 50 player. You are not the audience.
Yep.
You are not the audience. Please understand that, Drug Fox. When 50,000 people are watching Smash Summit, none of them are you. None of them. None of them. And although you can provide some valuable critique into analysis and breaking game situations down and making sure people understand the game better, the average person will never be Drug Fox. They will never be Drug Fox. And that commentary is not for Drug Fox or KGH or any of these people that have heavy critique for Melee commentary. The average person is looking for something that someone like Slime can deliver to them the best, which is like humorous and fun and insightful and striking a balance between these things. Who is balanced out by other people like Squid, who I think is kind of able to articulate very detailed information in like a fun and easy way, or balanced out by like wonderful color commentators like Scar, who can like really dish the emotion of a narrative. That's what I think Scar is best at, right? Like delivering these like very broad and overarching ideas that make you like feel something. That's what Scar is good at. And I think that's kind of like those are the skills that all kind of like go into commentary. And I think Anthony is this nice like place in the middle where he balances a lot of those things and delivers them very well.
I think the key word that we've been throwing around, or at least I've been throwing around a lot, is accessibility. And like this is no different when it comes to that. It's just making the words that you deliver through the stream accessible to someone who might just be randomly clicking in just to see what's going on this in this broadcast, and then that's what makes them stick around and really get into it. I think that it's interesting that you bring up like co-casters and how playing off of each other matters there. I do think that's obviously a very key component, and pretty much every esport has a set of casters that they work with at this point, whether it's 2, whether it's 3, whether it's whatever number. It is interesting to note that like solo casting just in general is really, really hard for that very reason. I think that not a single person, even someone who like Slime, who you're saying is very well rounded when it comes to all these things, I think if you threw him into kind of the fray as a solo caster, totally different beast than if you had like the backup. I think he can do it too.
But I see what you mean. Like the value of having somebody compliment you is sort of what brings value to commentary. I think somebody to give a good example of people who are really good at that is insanely hard to do a Smash like tri-cast well with that, like understanding your co-commentators and knowing where not to step on them. It's like an incredible skill that is actually like very difficult if you actually try it. And TK, EE, and Coney do an incredible job. They are probably the greatest trio in like Smash commentary. They do it like perfectly together.
No, for sure.
Yeah, Radar. I remember you and me did the for Alston Melee Bender. I think we both did tri-casts for our segments. Very different. And that was it was super weird because I was like, am I leaving someone out? Like, am I talking too much? Like, am I taking too much percentage of the time? You know, harping on this one segment of the game when someone else could have been talking. It was really interesting. I had a lot of fun doing it, but it was definitely a change of pace from doing like solo and duo comms.
I remember actually, like, I'm glad that you pointed at the whole like top player criticism of commentary. I know we are kind of running long, so we'll try to wrap this up quickly, but I do agree that I remember Slime tweeted something along the lines of, and as we say that, here is the man himself.
I just got done complimenting you, you piece of
Wow.
Um, that where he basically was saying
That's
how
peak
like
performance in commentary.
it's so
folks.
weird to be quoting him as he's on screen, but he said something like, I'm focusing on different stuff than you. And I feel like this is a thing that comes up a lot in Melee is that
Yeah.
there's an expectation from pretty much every community member, because every community member wants to be good at the game, that like, oh my God, if you don't know this like insanely niche thing, you're an idiot. And it's like, dude, like you have like even sometimes I'm wary of this in my own commentary where like because you're so used to playing and executing these crazy hard things, it feels weird to be like, guys, this thing is hard when it's like, I mean, it's not that hard to me. Like, I don't know, I've done it like 1,000 times, but it's like, dude, like, this is such a hard game. And I feel like we don't talk enough about like, look at how difficult that thing is, because we all have this like self-consciousness about like, well, if I say that, you know, I don't know, wave shining is hard. It's like, well, are you fucking like a noob? What the fuck? You think
Yeah.
wave shining is hard? So I don't know. I think we need to work on that. But I think I'm gonna give commentary a 6. Pretty much agree with what Aiden's saying. I wouldn't be as critical, but I actually think that was really good insight. I'm, certainly going to try to do that in my own commentary. So, what do you think, Walt?
I will say I didn't think it was bad. I didn't think it was this bad until I started working with talent from other games. So I actually was always had a very positive outlook on this until I started working with talent from other games, and I was like, holy fucking shit, nobody knows how to do anything.
Aiden, we're gonna ask you to watch one of our comms sets so you can tell us everything that
I'd
we're
love
doing
to.
wrong.
Commentary.
I'm gonna give it a 5. I do think that there's a ton of improvement that can be made. I think basically every point that we talked about is very, very good, and it's things that need to be considered in the future, especially if we want to make our.
Aiden, right? Sorry, Aiden, you were 4 for the thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry for all. I totally.
No, you're
derailed you.
good. You're good. Yeah, I just think if we want to like increase our pool of casters in the future, which I think is the ultimate goal, right? Because like having a pool of talent to work with as opposed to a select handful makes things easier from a production side. I think that's probably a good segue into production quality as well, if we wanted to talk about that.
Yeah. No, I think this is an easy one to slide into. Aiden, you look like you have a lot of thoughts on this one too. So do you want to just jump right into it?
I honestly I don't. I think it's like it's weird because it's production quality is about money, time, and resources, and I think BTS in the Melee scene just happens to have the most of that at the moment. And either that or you're fueled by one extremely passionate individual, aka Leva, who does amazing work on his own. And I think the production quality for our game is actually pretty high when you think about that. Like, our biggest events have pretty high production. Ludwig's is like intentionally low produced, like it's because it's meant to be like a personal stream. So if you exclude LACS, all the biggest tournaments have pretty decent production now. And I think when tournaments or smaller tournaments have shitty production, it's because you can't really fault them. They don't have as much money. They don't have as much experience. They don't have like a full team. It's often just one guy. So I think like production quality, maybe this is unfair from the way I judge commentary, but I think production quality I'm going to give like a 7 because of I think acknowledging the context of like how money affects production quality is important, and I'm going to give it a 7.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think like you can't look at some like Overwatch League broadcast or something where they're just like throwing buckets of money into it and be like, why don't we have what's it called, a jib or something that flies down a camera over a crowd? Like, I think we know why, guys.
I'm gonna fly my drone at events just so we can replicate that for the record. I'm totally gonna get permission to fly a drone indoors just so we could do that.
That'd be so
sick.
Sick.
I think production is pretty good. I think definitely the BTS Smash stuff probably is kind of the peak of that. But I think we've had like cool stuff that they've been kind of adding in. I think online events have added some stuff to it too. I'm pretty happy with it. Like, and I'm really, really excited to see how events are moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
But not too much to say in this category for me, at least, other than the lack of money.
Yeah, I think that there's again like I think there's a rating for BTS Smash, and then I think there's a rating for everyone else. At least at present, when it comes to production of live events, um, I think there are some like neat kind of niche quality of life improvements that we could maybe make when it comes to making a broadcast more cohesive. Um, I don't want to get like deep into this. We're already kind of like pretty long when it comes to time, but just as a funny anecdote, I had mentioned briefly, and this is something that I was interested in for a long time. The idea of kind of like an analyst desk in a similar vein of how League of Legends does. Like, okay, we're going to pop over to the analyst desk. They'll talk about how the match happened. Obviously, it's much easier for them to do it versus a melee because the matches are 30 minutes and they can kind of really like pick apart certain things that happened. They can talk about pick bans, figure out where things went wrong before the game even started versus melee. It's like, all right, this guy got like fucking bodied. So there's not much to say or unpack there. I remember Slime actually interacted with that tweet, and instead of giving any type of advice as to whether he wanted it or not, he just wrote "fuck that shit" to me. So I was like, all right, well, I guess we're never gonna get that, but we'll see. You know, I can hope at least that that's like things like that where I feel like if it doesn't create additional bandwidth constraints for the people running broadcast and it
Hmm.
doesn't increase the overall runtime of the show, then I feel like to me as someone who just like makes videos on YouTube, like that those seem like no-brainers to me. But I understand the costs and the manpower and whatever other necessary requirements that would go into something like, for instance, an analyst desk.
I actually don't really want one. Is that weird to say? I feel like I
It's not
don't.
weird to say. Like that's the
Apparently not
thing.
with
Is
mine, but
that
like I feel like I want. I think you can get a good amount in commentary. I
mm-hmm.
think it would not be a bad thing, but to me, if we were to use our resources towards something that isn't gameplay and commentary, I would like to see more like player interviews or segments. Like we used to see the skits that was at the summit events. I think those were really cool.
Yeah.
Like I think a level of production is also like, hey, what does this offer besides just nonstop gameplay? And interviews go a long way. Like if they ask, that can kind of create the narrative when they say something.
Yeah.
So I think that's something I'd like to see more of.
I think like the
In
one of the
this.
big motivators for me behind like again like it's not crazy for you to say you don't want an analyst desk. I think it would be cool if there's a way for us to pull it off, but I think at present and even far into the future we probably don't have a reasonable way to do that, especially at a high level where we can get someone to say like, hey, pull this clip from in-game timer 6 minutes 20 seconds, game 3. I want to talk about the second stock of IBEW versus SGJ or something like that. It's just impossible for us to be able to do that and do it on the fly, have the manpower to do it, have someone specifically running production to curate footage like that to break down at an analyst desk. It's just way too complex. Part of the motivator for me when it comes to something like that, though, is to give built-in breaks to casters, like tying into commentary. Because yeah, I do agree having something like an interview or some type of skit or pre-made content or pre-recorded content that fills time in between gives casters much needed breaks when they're already working like 9, 10, 11, 12 hour shifts when it comes to in-person events. um, and it just gives us built-in breaks. So for instance, like if BTS needs to run ads like as part of an agreement, or if we need to have time to have some type of sponsor read or ad read or something like that, or we want to cut to someone else who's doing an interview, like in Ipengu, for instance, like we have an extra person there where the casters just actively aren't doing work and they get a free break built in.
That makes sense. Do you have a number for production that you would give right now?
For me, I think
Knowing
it's
all
like a I would say like a 7. I think it's good. I think it's very good if you're BTS. So good job to you guys. Um, I think like kind of the field has a lot of catching up to do, but I'd be remiss to say that money is absolutely a factor when it comes to all these things. So it's like, you can't just say like, okay, get good. Like, all right, no, get good and also get $1 million or something like that, and then we'll talk. But
Which leads us a bit into our next and second last topic, which is investment potential. Which is a bit of a harder thing for us to kind of answer, especially Walt and I. But like, as at least for us, kind of people who are not as knowledgeable but still assuming, like, what do we feel like Melee is right now? Like if you were a gaming team, would you want to sign Melee players? If you were a events company, would you want to run an event? Who wants to start this one? Aiden's got his mouth open.
Keep it brief.
no.
I think yes.
Oh.
I think yes. I think the game is in like a general upswing right now. I think if sales teams recognize the value in Melee that clearly exists, like by the numbers, is even when you measure it against like other esports, then gets that into the hands of like sponsors, then I think it's like this game, like by the numbers, by the age that it has, like the relevance that it maintains, the Golden Guardians YouTube channel and how they've invested time in that, and they've seen like better returns on like investing in Melee content than League content, which like they have a League team, they have a lot of money to dish around in League clearly. It's just like it's a matter of like convincing the people that have the money that this like 20-year-old game like deserves it, and like through demonstrable results, we do deserve it. At least if their bar for other games is what it is through the events and the games that you can see like receive sponsorship and money, and like then Melee definitely deserves it. And like we are definitely have not capped out on our investment potential with the state of the scene as it currently is and what I expect it to grow to. And I think that's like a totally like fair. It's like I think this is a very like analytical like conclusion based on like what's available to us and like my understanding of like where the money goes and like what like sponsors want out of their activations.
Mm-hmm.
And the success of Melee streamers as individuals. I think for better or for worse, like even if viewership isn't amazing, like say even if like IBDW doesn't have 1,000 viewers, the sub to viewer ratio and like the loyalty of viewers is like really high in this community, and I think that's valuable.
Dude. Absolutely bonkers to think about. Also, thank you, David B. Kimball, for the raid. Appreciate it a lot, man. I'm glad that you said yes, because I was very scared that you were gonna say no. And I think I guess like Golden Guardians is the big example right now, right? Where like them putting money into Melee, and we kind of loosely talked about this with Sam Han. He's the guy, one of the guys behind the GG Melee YouTube channel right now. He's kind of the lead in terms of deciding content when it comes to that, and he's doing a great job. But it's kind of funny to think about the idea that, for instance, the community fund, like them putting 50K into various events over the span of however long it's going to be. By and large, 50,000 is not a ton of money, but it is a shitload of money for Melee. So to be able to make like something that I think a lot of large organizations would consider like a small or like, marginal investment of some variety, and like to have that be able to go miles for our community, I think says a lot. And then, it does add to that overall investment potential of like, I still can't get over the fact that like we have people who get like 100 viewers on Twitch but have 3,000 subscribers. Like that is just the most absurd statistic ever, and I don't think there are really any other like pro level gamers out there who have ratios like that. So Mango is somebody who consistently has 1.5K to 2K viewers and has fucking 14,000 subs. Yeah, it's like so crazy.
like when you think about Subrosa, who's like a really big Valorant streamer, right? Most of the time he has like more viewers than Mango, I think, but he has 2,000 subs. He's the same amount of subs as none.
Yeah.
That's insane. It's such a crazy stat. And I think like The nice thing about Melee, if the money goes to the right places, like with this Golden Guardians fund, for instance, which I'm hoping they do. They seem like they honestly want to give it like the correct approach. It's sort of like donating to big charities versus like donating to mutual funds. It's like I could give like $500 to like a local mutual aid organization and have it go a lot further than maybe like a 10,000 donation to like a large charity. And like it's kind of the same thing where like a lot of money in esports gets like wasted by like people with like people that have the money not understanding scenes or like not understanding like how things should work. And in Melee, it's like you can like give a pretty small amount of money to like staff or to players and
Yep.
like really move the needle for them in like a huge way. And I think that's like it's like if you're looking at investment like value, you know, you could get so much out of the Melee community in that regard. It's like you don't even have to put up that much money and you could get so much more return for it.
It is crazy, like how people who work in Melee, I think, are just expecting to not be paid at this point in their lives, where they're just like,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, like I just love the game a lot, so it's fine. Don't worry about it.
On the flip
But
side,
yeah.
though, like Aiden said it right earlier about like, the passion can only push you for so long.
Yeah.
Like I think
Yeah.
that is a problem that we have as well, is kind of like Melee players sort of being resigned to, oh, there's going to be no money in it. I'm not saying that like it's a problem of people not paying people. I don't think there's anything malicious going on or people necessarily being exploited. I just think getting more money into the scene would be great because people deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I guess my one thought, someone who's not an expert on this, that I think is really good, and I see this a lot with StarCraft as well, is like the audience for Melee is getting older, and that's a good thing. In this, like to me, from a perspective of like if I was an investor, is like I see these guys putting in like crazy amounts of money to like Fortnite things, and I think like, yeah, I mean, I get that the 14-year-old who watches this gets their parents to like spend money on something, but I feel like if you were a monitor company, because like that would be a good example of a sponsor that could come in if we did this monitor switch, and they said like, hey, here's a cool monitor you should buy, and like it is genuinely good, like I might buy it because I have a job and stuff, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, and I think even 10
Absolutely.
years ago the community didn't have that, and I think like our age is a strength in a big way, and I feel like you said, the numbers are going up. I think the numbers are good. I think there's a lot of stuff that like, yeah, a lot of loyalty. Like I was thinking of Fizzy's support. Like our community is basically giving
Yeah, that's
Fizzy like a
crazy, dude.
full-time job, and we're willing to do that. I think if that kind of demonstration of support, and the sub to viewer numbers is another great example of that, should show like investors should look at that and be like, okay, these are people that are willing to put their dollar behind their values and support something like that. So
I don't want to beat a
I'm
dead
gonna
horse
give it.
about that. Before you give your rating, Radar, because I do want to ask both of your opinions about this when it comes to the like viewer to subscriber ratio specifically, because like part of me wonders like, does that lower our investment potential because someone looks and sees that a Mango, who is, you know, probably the one of the big personalities in our scene, only gets 2,000 viewers or whatever, but like if they do a little bit more digging, they come to find out like, yeah, this guy makes like $28,000 a month off of Twitch.
That's the tough part from the sales perspective. I'll say that is that the way viewership stats are like thrown around and the way expectations of like sponsors, the way the expectations that sponsors have for like how their money is going to be thrown around or the games they want to work with are like really skewed.
Mm-hmm.
Like these people don't necessarily know what they're talking about. I think that's like one of the things I am the most jaded about in esports is like the people who make the decisions and have the money are usually people with very little insight into how things actually work, and as a result make really shitty decisions all the time, and you just have to go along for the ride because like they have the money. And that is honestly the summary of like the why esports like sucks. And so I think that unfortunately affects Melee in that regard, where like for a sponsor, if your sponsor isn't willing to give you the time of day as the sales team to sort of like explain like why this sort of like stat, like this viewer to sub ratio is like valuables for instance, then they're not likely to give you money. So
Sure. Sorry to
that's the
cut you off
weakness.
on your ranking, Radar. I just wanted to
No,
ask
no,
that
no,
first.
for sure. I think that's a completely fair statement. I think I'm going to give it a, since the word is potential, I think I'm going to give it a 7.5 because I think we're in a better state than we've ever been in a lot of ways. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of opportunity, particularly because the content has been elevating a lot. Like I feel like Golden Guardians, they got a bunch of new team members and they're doing a bunch of content and they're pushing stuff. And it looks like if I'm an esports team, I might go, hey, maybe we can do that too. Let's get in on this action. So I think the momentum is there. I'm going to say 7.5.
I'm
What
gonna
do you
say
guys?
7.
7.
I'm gonna give it a
Wall.
7 as well.
7. All right. Giving it
All
a
right,
7.
last one.
Last but not least, Aiden's
I think
desperate to
this
get
is
out of
a
here.
quick
We
and
all
dirty
are.
one. Yes.
This is the big, yeah, there's a lot of, I think there's two sides to this. So the path to pro can be professional melee player. And, a lot of people in the chat talking about this, professional commentator, professional, tournament organizer, etc. This is not going to be a very high scoring one. Spoiler alert. Who wants to start?
I
I'd
can
give it a
start real quick.
3.
Yeah, I think it's pretty low. And I think it just ties back into kind of the idea of like accessibility of content and like ways to learn the game that are out there that certainly need improvement in some way. It's also just like melee is really, 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 really hard. So even if like you have the resources out there, it's like you might just not have the what it takes to be a good player in melee, and that's just kind of the rub when it comes to that sort of thing. I'm gonna give it a 4, and I think that's generous.
I think I would completely disagree with the idea that wait, you're giving it a 3 or 4?
4.
And Aiden's 3. So I completely disagree with the idea that melee is too hard. Even though I think melee is hard, this idea that like, oh, some people can't cut it. I actually think for a long time, melee was one of the slackiest esports around. Like people would be practicing like 2 hours a day, maybe 1 hour a day, and I'd be watching like fucking StarCraft players playing like 8 hours a day that have coaches coming in. The problem is not effort. It is money and infrastructure. Aiden looks like he wants
Sure.
to say something. What do you want to say, Aiden?
StarCraft, yeah. I mean, StarCraft is a pretty rough comparison. I feel
It
like
is.
it's just like you have like an entire country behind you that like makes this like acceptable. And I would argue in that case, like, because you can tell by the way like there are Americans that go over there, or like Westerners in general that go to Korea and grind for years and they just make no fucking progress, dude. I actually think there's a reason that like Korea, even like when you look at the population like proportional to China, I think there is some cultural resilience and work ethic in Korea that creates stars like at games. Like it's when you think about like their level of success proportional to their population, especially like in comparison to China, I think is like kind of the proof of concept is just like something's going on over there, man. I don't know what it is. And
I think I know what
it
it
has to
That
do with like
internet
the
cafe
cultural
water.
acceptance of esports.
I think I know what it is. I'm pretty positive it is just infrastructure, and it is exactly what you're saying. The whole country's behind it. That like if you are 12 years old and you say, "Yo, I want to be pro at StarCraft," your parents don't go, "No, that's stupid." Like if you say, "Hey, I want to really get serious about this game," that's not stupid. Number two, if you start getting better and you have potential, there will be player scouts. There will be people going, "Hey, yo, this kid is like actually really good. He's already GM. Like we should start, training him up." There's a whole path to pro that exists, and we saw this divide in StarCraft 2 at least, where like some people would go over there and do well, and I think Aiden is right that like there is like a huge, crazy grindy work ethic, but I think like so much of that is just like the problem that melee has, and this is why I want to honestly give it a 1, is that I think they're like we had IBDW almost like starving as like a top 5 top 10 player when he was trying
Yeah.
to get Twitch subs. He was doing donation goals for like fucking food. Like this is a guy who would be just an amazing player, like the peak of the game, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh man, it's gonna be hard to live off this. And that's the very top, let alone like if you're a semi-pro player, there is nothing. And it comes back down to money in the biggest way, but from a player perspective, it is like a 1 for sure for me. I think it's just there's nothing.
Uh I think this is fair, and I think I agree with you on almost all fronts. And the only reason I raise this to a 3 and the kind of the light at the end of the tunnel is because of the structure of the game. You, the one silver lining, I don't know if you could even call it that, is because the game has like predominantly open tournaments and like minimal layers to like climb or like beat people from the top level. Once you are good enough, once you have arrived at the skill level that allows you to beat those players, you get to do it immediately. You don't need to like wait to qualify for some type of league. You don't need to like challenge, and like there's no kind of like layers of leagues or structures that you need to climb through to get to the top level. You just like, as soon as you are good enough, you get to be the best player as soon as you are the best player. And I think that is the only redeeming quality, is like you don't have to fight through all those layers, especially because it's like a combination of like the open way we've structured our community and the lack of centralization, and the fact that we're also a 1v1 game and not a team game. And that's why I would make it a 3 instead of a 1.
Yeah, that's
Definitely bumping it up to 2. I think that's a great point. Yeah,
I think it's interesting. Like that entire point just basically means like skill equals visibility, like 1-to-1, versus like for like a League of Legends, skill maybe equals academy team, which eventually equals visibility if your team qualifies, and then you can like beat another team or move up to the pro team or whatever. That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. Because it's huge. Just suddenly, like the barrier to pro players is very low. You can just kind of you can play them if you want. You know, like it's not hard. That's part of how tournaments work. How pro players make their money is they go and they say, "Hey, can I money match you?" And they're like, "Yeah, I got a line, man. Let's do it."
Yeah, it's actually pretty funny that I mentioned that as like a quality point, because like I have advocated for so many tournament structures that sort of like gate these pro players off a little more and like keep like lower level players in their own separate divisions and stuff. But this is probably the greatest strength of it, is like the lack of friction to reach to kind of like play against that top level.
As a side note, maybe kind of related to this, but that's why I do think, I can't recall the name of it right now, but someone's doing a content piece, and this kind of is related to like if people want to become like a high level melee player, but it's like they're doing kind of like a pseudo reality TV show where top level melee players are coaching just like shitters, and like doing interviews, and then having like all of the trainees play against each other. Like, I don't know, not super related to the actual kind of like infrastructure discussion that we were talking about, but I do think things like that kind of widen the amount of players who can kind of reach a top level, and it makes it more accessible for your average melee player to kind of like really get in the know with someone intimately for who's a top level melee player.
So we've covered.
That actually gives me an idea. This is you're giving me some inspiration right now.
Oh, we could talk. You want to talk about it after?
Yeah, I'll tell you after.
All right.
So the last thing, we've covered players, but the other side of this coin is path to pro in a non-player's perspective. So commentary. Aiden can speak a lot about the path to being a professional TO. And being involved in esports.
He's like, no, I can't.
The path to becoming a professional TO
is to live in poverty for.
I'm not changing my answer, by the way. It's not like, oh, but don't worry, guys. The content,
so funny.
The staff, they got a really good.
The path to becoming a professional Smash staff is to just toe the line of poverty for as long as you can.
Yeah, it's to have money to lose, basically. Like, yeah. Aiden, share your thoughts, man.
He's like, no, I don't even want to.
Dude, nothing. I don't know, man. I feel like when I contextualize like my journey, it feels like, I don't know. It's so funny to think about. It's so like, I don't even know what to say. Like, this isn't like a stupid question or something. It's just like, there's no professional TO is a really weird word, because I think like pretty much nobody is doing this full time in Smash. There's a very, very small list of people that are doing TOing full time. It's smaller than the list of players playing full time, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's like, who is it? It's like, it's me, and then Aaron
Uh-oh.
Tollerud. Dude, I'm running through the list right now, man. Champ has a job. Champ could go full time. I'd like to mention that. Champ is probably one of the people that could go full time,
Yeah.
especially when 2DG was at its peak. But he has a job. Bobak, I think no, but Bobak does other freelance work. He doesn't do Genesis full time. Dude, it doesn't exist. Actually doesn't exist. If you want a TO full time, it doesn't. It's like not real. I didn't even get here on purpose. It wasn't even intentional. It just kind of happened this way. Like it, I think Shackelford, Steven Shackelford in Arizona does it full time. There's a few people that might own game shops that sort of counts because they own like a physical piece of property that also does other things. Um, there's also, I think it's weird because pretty much every TO that could possibly make it work full time also has a full time job. And then I would be in the same boat. I don't even know if I can make it work on my own, but the only reason that I do it full time is because it just happens to be my job, the job that
Hmm.
complements it. So I I don't think it's like path to like esports professional if you want to be like working in esports would be like a little more clear. Everybody has a different way of like going about it. Um but I think that's like very few people are TOing Smash tournaments in a full-time capacity. It's a very, very small list as far as I understand.
And unfortunately, that is the same case for full-time commentators. There just isn't a full-time commentator in Smash. There's zero.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there are so many
I think there
commentators.
there is actually zero.
Yeah,
That is
it's zero. I
that
cannot think of
actually
any.
speaks to the point, sorry, about commentary, like when we're talking about it. My I did give that a very low rating. My defense of all these people in Smash is that it's very difficult to like work on your craft and take it super seriously and dump all your time into it when you can't do that thing full time. Like
Yeah.
I think a big part of like why like the CS:GO talent is so good is you have something to aspire towards, right? Like Machine and Sponge are this incredible duo who are like so good at what they've done, but they've also improved a lot over the years, and they have the ability to do that because they work in an esport that like pays them a lot. There was something to aspire and like create a career out of. But it's like if you want to be the best Smash commentator, you're kind of chasing nothing, right? It's just like you're really, really doing it for the sake of like the love of the game, which is like admirable, but it's not realistic.
I think even when you account for all that too, like it's still very, very difficult. Like say for example, we did have full-time commentators. It would still be very difficult to break in. Like I know both Walt and I, like as we've already mentioned, are trying to get more involved in commentary, and it can be hard to go from like I want to get involved in this to
Hmm.
maybe I'll have some kind of regular opportunities to
No.
how do I get the bigger, like you have to kind of unseat people, which is like
Mhm.
Yeah.
tricky.
I mean, dude,
It's
even that though is like I would say a big reason we even got some of the commentary slots we got was
so you,
because of reputation. Like,
yeah.
it's like for your average Joey Caster Mike to try to hop on and be like, I want to talk about Smash, like it's
You're out of
hard for
luck.
those people. And someone actually asked that in my Discord very recently, was like, oh, I really want to get into commentary, how do I do it? And I'm like, shit, man, I have no idea. I just asked, and I think a large reason they said yes was because I have a YouTube channel, to be completely honest with you. um but yeah,
I do think asking is important. Like
You know,
it's like to just to add on what you're saying, like like some people don't ask. Some people
hmm
don't go like
yeah,
you have to like you know Walt and I got that Levo gig, I guess, with Leffen, and I replied on Twitter to Leffen saying like, "Hey, we want commentators or whatever." Basically every single tweet, and then eventually they were like, "Hey, do you guys want to do this weekend?" I was thinking like, "Fuck yes, man." You know what I mean? Like because you got to be
yeah.
out there like and asking. So
I think I think about it like I used to commentate more. I don't know if I was necessarily better at it, but I used to commentate more,
sure.
and now I basically don't commentate at all. And I would have a much easier getting a commentary spot now than I did back then. 100%.
exactly, yeah.
It's a tough road. Make it in Melee.
Yeah,
Many
it's
have
a
failed.
game. It's a game. I think that our most admirable quality and the reason this game is like as important as it is 20 years later is it is really a game that is held together by the love for it, which speaks to the quality of the game itself and by extension, I would say the community. So I think that's important.
All right. I think, Walt, you can refresh. All the numbers are up there. I think it's time to wrap up. We have, the 3 slides done. It took a while. Again, Aiden, thank you so much for taking your time throughout the whole way. We know this was a long episode, but obviously we're going to skip Ask the Mix-Up questions. We just can't
Yeah.
get to them. Sorry, guys. 3.3 hours in. 5 hours in, sorry.
But by the next time we have a show, the hashtag will certainly be trending. I'm sure of it.
Oh,
So
absolutely. We are so close. But yeah. Closing thoughts. Any closing thoughts before we do shoutouts and stuff?
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'll also apologize. I just get like really excited about some shit sometimes, and I know I butt in. So, but thank you for having me here. It was definitely a cool concept to like go over the cards like this. It gives us a lot of room and like flexibility to talk about different stuff. So, yeah, thanks a lot.
yeah, I think Radar would agree. We enjoy having those passionate buttons constantly because it makes for really good conversation. First off, I know I would love to have you on as a guest again in the future just to kind of talk about really anything esports related because I think your insight's super valuable when it comes to that stuff. Also, really down to talk about that idea you said you had as well.
Sure.
I do have one more question for you. As a guest of the show, we're gonna be starting this trend of the guest gets to decide who we raid going into the stream ending. So take your pick, take your time, and while you kind of decide on that, we'll do our closing thoughts here. But yeah, guys, this was a really fun episode. This was a really long episode, but I think it was valuable. I hope you guys enjoyed the Melee report card. Again, huge shout outs to you, Radar, for kind of the whole concept and putting this idea together for this show. It turned out really great. We got actually quite a few responses on the forum as well. Any last minute people that want to add in to fill out your own responses if you have different opinions on how we would rank things, exclamation point report card in the chat, and you can get access to a link to talk about where you guys would rank everything. But I think we kind of had some pretty fair arguments for basically everything that we had here. So I had a lot of fun, and it was awesome to be able to do it with you guys here.
Yeah, I to echo what Walt's saying, like I think it's so funny how we'll want to have new guests and then we'll also want to have the same guests we've already had. Like, damn, they're good guests, man. Like they got content and they're good at speaking. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hope if you're watching this on YouTube, check out all the other episodes, and I think that's it, right?
Yeah, with that, we're gonna do our little wrap up. I will shortly move to our thanks for watching screen and then promptly end the stream. But first, Aiden, have you decided who we want to raid here?
Yeah, do you guys want to raid Slime?
Yeah.
All right.
Is it just what's his Twitch handle?
It's Slime IRL.
Oh, he's gonna get so mad that I'm raiding him, isn't he?
Oh wait, he might. Maybe we don't raid him.
Wait.
Let's raid Ringler.
Okay.
Ringler SSBM.
Oh God, you agreed with me so quickly. Does he have beef with me?
No, I don't think there's beef. I think he just hates being raided.
Oh really?
Yeah, I kind of forgot about that.
Damn.
It's like you reminded me. It's like I thought about every time I've seen Anthony get raided, he's like resentful about it. So like maybe not.
All right. So Ringler SSBM is going to be the raid, fellas, and we're going to get this started right now. Again, thank you guys for joining in on this episode of the Mix-Up. We will hopefully be back. I mean, me and Radar, we're starting to get close to a consistent schedule here, guys. You know, it was only a 1 week break this time as opposed to a full month. So we're on our way back to bi-weekly shows. So hopefully we'll have another one back for you guys in 2 weeks. If not, I don't know, we'll figure something out. But It was a lot of fun. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys very soon. Peace out, everybody.
See you guys.